The story begins with the fact that the largest hospital under the number 9 cities of Zhuangzhou has recently been suddenly crowded with sick. The outbreaks of the disease have become more frequent, therefore more and more requests became more and more requests. That is why Lin Kan decided to return to the old work that he once did. Now his goal was to earn as many time capsules as possible. It was necessary to transfer her only sister to the best hospital, where she could give her good care and treatment. He always came to the girl to at least morally support her. Therefore, this time did not differ, and he promised his sister, which would certainly help her. The girl was badly damaged by the accident when she got into a car disaster on the street. Witnesses did not notice who became guilty in that situation, but the elder brother was aimed at finding this bastard, which simply disappeared after the crime was committed. Soon in the corridor of the hospital, there was a discussion of the director of Van and his subordinate, that it makes no sense to take care of the bodies of the dead. According to the leader, they cost nothing, so it was worth just finding a place for them and quickly getting rid. The fat man entered the ward in which Lin Yak was located and ordered the boy that the time had come to pay for the services. Lin was sure that the date of payment was the next day, but the director said that the price was increased, so the time capsules were used. The guy knew that earlier Van came up with reasons to raise the price, but now he does it when he pleased. But the director was not interested in this. He needed only money. Therefore, without even a drop of sympathy, he ordered the line to take the girl's body and not to bother him anymore. It was difficult for the young man to believe in the cruelty of the doctor, but now the fate of his sister depended only on his choice. According to the director, if Lin leaves this hospital, then the girl will definitely die, and only no one will deal with her. Now the boy had no choice, and Van said that one day would take 5 time capsules, that in total it turned out 7 days. And after receiving payment, the director became easier, because now he will have time exclusively for himself. But before leaving the ward, he added that there would be enough payment for 5 days. When he does not receive the right number of capsules again, Lena's sister will be kicked out. The doctor fell strongly in the guy's eyes, but he did not have time to think. But it was necessary to earn capsules as soon as possible. As it turned out, 16 years ago, an unknown meteorite, which was huge, fell from the sky. This meteorite caused a large amount of destruction, and because of it, a strange fiery storm appeared, which could not quench. The fiery storm spread at high speed and touched people who failed to hide. Now, from the only spark of that flame, living creatures have turned into real monsters of time, which resembled zombies. These electronic watches on their body recorded the life expectancy of every person, and they could be traded by interacting with each other. After this happened, time turned into real money, which was wild and incomprehensible to the large number of the population of the planet. Now, food required 2 hourly snack, sweet, milk, and tea. Only 1 tea with milk had to be spent 30 minutes. Even if people want to give birth to a child, they must also pay 1 year of life, or otherwise the baby will die. And those who survived had to not only survive the losses of their loved ones, but also continue to experience much more stress. They should work hard to earn cabbage of time to continue life. And on the other hand, you also need to eat, since hunger leads to an early spending of time. But there were rare cases when someone managed to get rich and get an endless amount of time thanks to their luck. While Lin recalled the details of the story, the director of Van suddenly began to raise the noise throughout the hospital and fell in the middle of the corridor. One of the patients whose body has already been taken to the morgue rose with his own feet and walked along the corridor to Van. After all, if a person ended with time, he was dying. And after that, he became a real monster of time. When Lin K noticed one of the monsters, he was very surprised, since there should have been reliable guard in the hospital. The boy did not know where this monster came from, but suddenly he paid attention to the bracelet, which was on the arm of the deceased. The bracelet was a kind of mark that the body had already happened in the morgue. However, there the corpses should have been treated with a special solution so that they would not become monsters of time. Director Van was afraid for his life, so Lena began to beg to protect him. As a reward, the guy will receive 3 months of free treatment for his sister. This proposal was profitable for K, but he did not have much time for thought, since the monster had already begun to attack. Director Van could not restrain his tears, since he was sorry to lose the time capsule that he received during his work. But his proposal was needed for Lin, so the guy defended the fat man and warned the monster's blow. The monster was torn apart, and instead of blood, a flame flowed in his body, which appeared on the planet after the explosion of the meteorite. As it turned out, Lin always carried sharp weapons with him, as monsters could suddenly appear on the street at the training ground. He understood that the zombie in front of him turned into such recently, so the level of his strength was still quite weak. Now the main goal was to destroy the core of the monster, which controlled his body and ordered to kill. The core was a certain heart of the dead, which was in the chest, and it was difficult to get to it. But despite the obstacles, Lin nevertheless managed to get rid of the monster with only the movement of the knife. From what he saw, the director Van almost fainted. Now he was wondering who the guy was working, that he has such a force and equipment. Lina was pleased that someone could admire his skill, so he held out his hand and wanted to introduce himself. But the director ordered the guy to immediately get out and not touch his palms, which really killed his monster. Lin did not expect such a sharp answer, but most of all he was bothered by the question regarding the deal that the man proposed. But as it turned out, the young man's suspicions were true, since the fat man did not want to adhere to his promises, and again reminded of payment. Given the danger level of this area, Lin could not allow his sister to stay in this place and had to quickly resolve the issue with housing. And for worthy housing, it was necessary to have enough money, so without hesitation for a long time, the guy took up the phone. Among the latest challenges, he had several unknown contacts, which should be addressed right now. Lina was difficult to set up on such a deal, but the life of a sister was more important than any moral principles. Therefore, while the beep sounded to the yak of the phone, he looked at the defenseless body of the little one, which was completely under his care. Soon the beeps ended, calling his name. Lin introduced himself as a traveler knight, whom they had previously wanted to recruit. He said that he was ready to fulfill the mission, and was waiting for everything necessary for this. In this crazy apocalyptic world, only the city of Zuanju could become a refuge for mankind. There were 4 large knightly detachments. The first is a knightly group of glory. Its members protect the city, ensuring security and anticipating illegal events, as well as the police. The knightly defense group acted as city guards, protecting the townspeople, preventing the invasion of temporary zombies and monsters. The knightly group of marauders cleaned the surrounding houses and mined resources for their city Zuanzhou. And the knightly group of travelers solely carried out the mission of the wild territory and maintained relations with the city. Each of the groups had its own special shape to make it more convenient to identify their members and provide them with the right protection. Lin Qi used to be one of those knights who traveled lonely and, remaining anonymous, maintained relations with others. It was difficult to recognize him, so when the guy tried to leave the city, the sentry knight asked him for a pass to exit. Due to the fact that the wild zone was extremely dangerous, ordinary people were forbidden to leave her without permission. It was on this day that Uncle Liu was guarded, who had long been familiar to Lina, and asked his sister's condition. Qi had no choice but to tell the sad truth. The man understood that the young man was very difficult and asked him to be careful. Recently, there are more stray monsters in this territory, and the bridge in the direction of the city of Ming was broken. This could become one of the obstacles to Lin, but he did not have much time for empty conversations and he went on. However, it seemed strange to Uncle LB that the young man went to fulfill the mission of a traveler with an ordinary tool. He did not even have a motorcycle that would help to escape. After all, he used to be a brilliant knight who almost got to the Apocalypse training camp, and now rolled up to such a level. Linnea had no choice but to follow his method, because now he was responsible not only for his life. The weather conditions were terrible for the walk, as small sand fell into the eyes from all sides, which greatly cut the mucous membrane. In addition, as soon as Lin left the outskirts of the city, the connection on his phone immediately disappeared, and the distance between the city of Ming and the city of Zhuangzhou was about 80 kilometers. If the guy had his transport, then he could return during the day. But now, in order to repay the medical accounts of his sisters, Kay had to sell all valuable equipment, and even a favorite motorcycle. Now he could only move on foot, so that the trip could take about 3 days. It also meant that he would have to break the camp in the wild zone at night, and it was too risky. Therefore, the knight hoped only that he would still be able to find a safe place for a temporary overnight stay. In addition, the guy had a valuable thing in his hands that the customer asked to deliver. If he manages to fulfill the mission, then he will be able to get 200 days of remuneration. Namely, he needed to convey a special precious stone containing a mysterious inscription. Lin was convinced that he had not forgotten the box of the house, and began to confidently walk further to get to the neighboring city faster. All the houses around were destroyed, so the danger was waiting at every step, because such ruins were an ideal refuge for temporary monsters. All of them were once ordinary people, but after a dangerous fire from a meteorite hit, their bodies no longer belonged to human ones. Lin tried to be careful, so he immediately drew attention to the silhouette, which was hiding near him. The guy knew that this was a temporary monster, but it was strange that he was not so far away from the city, so a group of Knights Marauders had to clean this area. However, Kay quickly looked at the zombie and noticed that the light in his chest is rather weak. Therefore, he had a low rank. But despite this, monsters, even with a low level of power, could still be harmful to ordinary people. They were rather dexterous, so this monster was not behind the system, also rushed at Lina to deprive him of his life. On his hands were sharp nails, with which he could easily tear the body of an ordinary person and turn him into a similar zombie. But such a creature was not the first on the path of Kay, so he knew their weak place and understood how exactly needed to defend himself. As a weapon, the guy again had a sharp knife, which he easily pierced the rotten body of the attacker and deprived him of a chance to win. The most important thing was to get into a bright core, which was a piece of that apocalyptic fire. It was this detail that gave strength to move these monsters, and was the basis for their existence on the planet. The nucleus had sharp roots with which it held tight to the body of the dead man, and did not give him the opportunity to exist separately. Therefore, when Lin still managed to defeat the monster, he bowed over a lifeless body and extended his hand to its base. Then he took a bright core in his palm and again became convinced that the chest of the zombie was their weak place. And breaking through the time crystal, ordinary people can absorb the energy of time inside. Therefore, on such zombies that travel alone, the easiest way to hunt, without missing the opportunity to replenish the vital resources for survival. The guy crushed the nucleus of the monster in his hands. After that, another 130 days to life increased on his hour watch, which became a good reward. Having the strength to go further, Lin understood that only more obstacles were waiting ahead, and the main thing was not to lose life. But his time for rest did not last long, since somewhere nearby he heard strange sounds that were inherent in the zombies. As it turned out, his ear did not fail him again, and managed to recognize a flock of temporary monsters who hunted ordinary people. At some point, the young man was very upset because of his failure. It was not clear to him why 3 monsters suddenly appear next to him, whose rank was above the previous one. Even if he is at the peak of his strength, he will be able to cope with only 2 such, not to mention the fact that his weapons are now not what was once. But fortunately, he managed to quickly run away, and if he had not done this, he would have died. This place was too dangerous, so it was worth climbing the stairs and first of all hide. As soon as the knight rose to the top floor, he suddenly saw another silhouette out of the corner of his eye, which foreshadowed the danger. When Lin drew attention to the monster, which was so close to him, he drew attention to the chest, which seemed to burst. Inside them was a nucleus that testified to a very high level of rank, namely, the 7th. At that moment, Lin realized that he had no chance to win with such a monster, so it is worth cleaning his legs from there. The monster was extremely clever and moved much faster than the young man, who only prayed not to die. At some point, the jaw of the zombie was right near his head. Then Lin immediately remembered the sister who was waiting for him. But the words of mercy did not make sense, since the zombies lost control of their own consciousness and were no longer people. Suddenly, a monster of the 7th rank heavily grabbed Kay with his teeth by the shoulder. Now it was quite difficult to survive. However, the knight had some experience, and being sure that he needs to live on, he threw the zombies on the stairs. The monster flew down and bruised greatly from the fall. But this could not be detained for a long time. The guy's shoulder was damaged and hurt a lot, but now he needed to run away from such an enemy as possible. Therefore, he nevertheless climbed to the top of the house and ended up on the roof, where he tried to close the door as best as possible, which was the only entrance to this place. But as soon as he managed to stop, the clock began the countdown. The reason for this was the monster's bite. Lina needed to eat some kind of food as soon as possible in order to stop the countdown of time for life, since the food gave a lot of energy. However, suddenly, he heard someone knocking hard at the front door. And most likely it was about the 7th rank monk, which quickly got to his feet. Now the boy had no time to rest, because it was necessary to defend himself from the monster as soon as possible. The knight had no other choice, so it was worth taking a chance to fulfill the mission and return to the sick sister. The thought of her always made sense for the life of Kay, so he took out a weapon and was ready to attack the zombies. Having thrown off excess clothes and a backpack, Lin decided to run the first on the monster and held a sharp knife ahead of him. The most important thing was to evade the blows of the monster, which was quite dexterous due to its rank. Each of his blow could be deadly, so caution here was extremely important. Lin was stubborn. He wanted not only to defend himself, but also to get the very core that was in his chest and was preserved behind a certain gate. The guy was faced with a similar situation for the first time. Previously, he could break the chest of monsters with one blow, but this time, he could not. His knife simply could not advance further, as if the noble was shrouded in metal protection. Therefore, when the monster felt the danger, Lina threw off in one movement from his body and rushed at him into an attack. The knight was very scared, since now he could not cope with his opponent so easily at the expense of his strength. At some point, the guy was very close to his death when the guests rushed at him from above and tried to crush, but Lin managed to put his legs in time in the correct position and, evading the monster's blow, throw it off the roof. As a result, the monster flew down and, with his cry, clearly attracted the attention of other similar ones that would become another obstacle. Looking at his opponent, Kay understood that he would not die from the fall from such a height, but at least give an opportunity for a while to restore. Moreover, it was not important to think about it now, when the knight's shoulder was severely bleeding from the bite. Now, when the back was still on the clock, the young man was sure that even God would not help him. Being so close to his own death, Lin began to apologize to his parents for not managing to protect his sister. While the guy pronounced his last words, the clock continued to take away days from his life with extraordinary speed. Most of all, Kay was upset that he could not find the bastard that once knocked her by car and take revenge. In addition, he was also waiting for the customer, to whom he had to deliver his stone and complete the task. Then, out of pain and his own weakness, the guy wanted to crush everything that was nearby in order to somehow supplant anger at himself. Now there were only 2 days left on the clock, which could now leave him in a matter of seconds. Kay barely restrained his tears and simply began to scream in pain, being furious over himself and the world, which once suddenly changed. Without noticing it, the guy crushed the same gem that was supposed to deliver to the neighboring city. Not knowing that it was exactly, Lin was very surprised when his body began to feel unknown energy. In the end, an unfamiliar screen appeared in front of him with the words about the beginning of the activation of the time system. Now Lin needed time to recover after such a surprise, since a second earlier he was ready for death. The most amazing thing is that that gem has become a system. In addition, the guy's time ceased to decrease, but simply stopped. Then the young man drew attention to his shoulder and noticed that his deep wound stopped bleeding and completely healed. And there were many notifications of activation and confirmation of information about the media from the system. Now Lin could open his own story and see that his level of power became 6th, and certain slots for objects of the character appeared. So he could open a certain inventory, as if in the game, and view all possible weapons for himself. Lin felt like a real computer game, where he is the main character and can choose anything for himself. Suddenly, the system sent another notification about obtaining a newspaper package and the ability to open it. At first, the notification showed the receipt of a high-ranking weapon, namely a dagger of combustible flame, reminiscent of a meteorite. The next notice showed the receipt of an improved high-ranking gun, namely shoes, which was silent. And the last thing he received was the book of the highest rank, which provided the owner with the opportunity to use a fist that destroys the mountains. In addition, the systems of the system can only be used by the carrier of the system itself, and only the question arose whether Lin wants to accept this proposal. Without hesitation, the young man agreed and immediately received a dagger of the Gorky flame of the D rank, with the help of which he will be able to increase the temperature. There was also shoes of the same rank, and thanks to the elements, the owner will be able to increase the speed and reduce the noise that is created during movement. As for the fist, which destroys the mountains, thanks to this possibility, the owner can increase the power of a fist. After Lin accepted all these awards, they surprisingly began to fall into his body and fill with energy. Feeling his physical body, the young man realized that everything that was happening to him is not a dream. Now he really improved his capabilities. But suddenly the same monster of the 7th rank appeared from the door, which, despite the fractures, again rose to the roof. It was expected for Lin, because from the very beginning he understood that the zombie would not die of the fall with such force. And despite the fact that the young man received 2 types of improved weapons, he still had to go against the 7th rank monster when his own life was only 1 second. The guy had to be extremely careful, because if he receives at least a little damage, he would immediately lose his life. But he managed to notice that the zombie leg was broken, and this exactly affects its speed. The young man was confident in his victory, but you need to be careful. Having shoes with the skill of accelerated movement, which managed to quietly be behind the monster in order to distract it. After that, he decided to use the new weapon, namely the dagger of the cow flame, which caused quite a lot of damage. The weapon itself was sharp, and was indeed shrouded in a bright flame, which in combination gave great power. The main goal of Lina was the core of the monsters of time, which for the first time he was not able to get the enemy out of his chest. But this time, the guy was confident in himself, and with all his might hit the monster in the back. He still managed to push his engine. After the blow received, the monster fell to the ground, and the core rolled from its lifeless body on the ground to Kei's feet. The latter continued to rejoice at the fact that in a combination of a fist that destroys the mountain and the burning dagger, it can apply such great damage. Previously, this defeated zombie was a strong fear for him, and now he was killed from one blow, almost not making efforts. But without losing the opportunity to restore vital resources, Lin took up the core and crushed it in his hand. Then, on his hour watch, 270 days were added to his life, and now it was possible to confidently move on. And the system notified that the level of strength of the guy was raised. After that, he realized that I have resisted life and death trials. This is the fastest way to increase my level. Also, the system was added in the system, which was quite clear for the carrier. But the question arose regarding the store in accordance with its rank. After he pressed the option unfamiliar to him, a screen with straw skills, improvements, medicines, and weapons opened. There was even a potion of genes and a potion of the mental spirit, which was quite convenient. But since the carrier had an unlimited number of chances to get a lottery, the system asked if the owner wanted to start awards. Lin did not delay this and immediately received a supernatural seed, which can ignore physical awakening, and by force can force people to oppose this or that element. Then the young man was surprised because he had heard before that physical awakening and awakening of the elements could not coexist together. No one can have these two opportunities at the same time. Physical awakening can lead to activity one of the 10 forces of the element that is able to strengthen the physical body, and a person will receive frightening combat abilities. Meanwhile, as an awakening of the elements can lead to activity in one of 100 mental power, which allows them to create the power of the elements. Some can control water, and some with fire. Lin knew that the elements were divided into water, fire, wood, earth, ice, and lightning. The latter was a rare ability. Regardless of what type of awakening in the carrier, after awakening, it will begin with the lowest rank. Now which had the physical strength and power of the elements, it is stronger than before, and can hunt temporary zombies even faster. Lin could completely manage his abilities and owned good weapons. So he confidently said that his sister was waiting for him. Suddenly, an unknown silhouette appeared near the night, and in a human voice asked why the guy is still alive. As it turned out, it was a girl, and Lin immediately recognized her. He called her the customer, which she really did not like. Therefore, having made a remark to the guy, the girl asked him to no longer use such a word for her, and introduced herself as Shui. But her name was not so worried about Lina as the reason why she was in this place. As it turned out, she was worried and followed to take her subject. The guy had no reason to answer with the precious stone that he used and received the system. Therefore, he said that he had lost the order. As it turned out, this thing was a gift for the birthday of Mom Shui. The girl had to go through many obstacles to pick up the stone, because of which she almost died. Now Lina was worried about the question of where the little girl was able to get this special stone. As it turned out, during a walk, she picked him up because of an unusual appearance and decided to give her mother to the anniversary. And now she demanded payment for the fact that the knight lost him. At that moment, Lin realized that the girl knew nothing about his special possibilities, and this was the most important. But the decision of Shui has already paid a deposit in the amount of 300 days, which now demanded back for an unfulfilled deal. Such payment was fair, but now Lin did not have a full 200 days, so he could not give everything. Therefore, after thinking a little, the guy suggested first give 100 days, and he would give the rest of the amount later. Such a proposal was arranged by Shui, so they shook hands to pass the days to life. Having received part of the days, the girl was delighted, because she once accidentally picked up a stone for which they would not give anything in a jewelry store. And now she managed to get 300 days. But before leaving, she emphasized that the guy should give her 200 more. In case of violation of the agreement, she will sue him. Lin once again confirmed her promise, after which the girl decided to leave the first from this place. But before letting her out, Kei asked where Sui found a stone. As it turned out, it was near the Minxian Bridge, which people blew up. However, Lin had different information regarding that bridge. He was sure that he was destroyed by toxic rain, and the girl reported that she had seen her with her own eyes. Now the guy thought about what he heard, and wanted to check what exactly happened to the bridge. And Sui Wei now had to find some kind of traveler knight with his own car in order to get to the city of Ming as soon as possible. The monsters continued to attack from all sides. Moreover, their level of force was quite different, but this did not prevent them from coexisting. They were ready to rush to a whole crowd when they felt somewhere nearby to destroy him. Looking around, Lin was very surprised how such a small and fragile girl managed to get to him on his own, despite the zombies. But now it did not matter to him. He had little time left, so it was better to hurry and kill several monsters. After all, now, if he is careful, he will be able to simultaneously kill 3 5th-level monsters. After waiting for a successful moment, Lin rushed at one of the zombies, which passed near the ruins in which the guy hid. He prepared his combustible dagger in advance and immediately directed it to the monster's chest. In addition, he applied a fist that destroys the mountains, and in combination it gave a good weapon to which additional efforts should not be made. Now, in a matter of seconds, the guy managed to deal with several monsters at the same time and get a reward. It was now quite easy for him to take the time crystal at the monster, as if the costs of the child had candy. Zombies continued to rush at him, but Lin did not lose much his own strength, so he was not opposed to competing. There was always an extremely strong dagger with them, thanks to which he pierced the chest of monsters. Even by some miracle, the fact that in a fairly short time you can get so many awards seemed. Therefore, Qi thought about trying to win the 6th level. Now he quickly absorbed the obtained nuclei of mutants, thanks to which he had already 500 days of life in stock. It was a good way to get a head start to earn a little more time before returning. Soon they will be able to move to the external area and change the hospital with their sister. After all, the city was divided into 4 areas from the internal to the external, namely the central region, internal, external, and extreme. The closer to the latter, the more dangerous. Lin did not even notice how he had already killed more than 3 monsters, and their dead bodies were lying around like garbage. Then the guy decided to revise his own list of objects and noticed that now he has more than 700 days for life. Suddenly, the topic appeared with rice and announced the purchase of a Class D genetic potion, for which it was necessary to give 300 days. At first, Lin hesitated regarding such a decision, but he knew that later he would be able to earn many more days, so you can take a chance. Soon the purchase was completed, and now he has 400 days and the 7th level of force. Then the system gave the owner a flask with a blue substance, and congratulated on an increase in strength to the 8th, so he will receive a lottery. Lin thought about the fact that he would drink 4 bottles of a genetic potion, and finally switch to a level higher. But it was expensive, but still faster than ordinary training. But there was still a problem. The guy killed monsters all day, and now there were wounds on his body. He treated them superficially, but this was not enough. Therefore, he decided to buy a healing potion. In addition to water and food, outside the city, the most valuable were medical supplies, although it was profitable to absorb the crystals of time. But if you do not be careful, there will be more time spent than earned. And although the healing potion is a little expensive, it can save more time than the usual treatment. Suddenly, the system reported the possibility of getting a lottery and asked if the owner agrees to do so. Lin, without unnecessary thought, confirmed the proposal and received a shock protection for the hands of his corresponding rank. They were called the guarantee of a stinging fist. This thing could be used as a shield, which can significantly increase the penetration ability in 1 instant. The guy was glad that now he has another improved weapon in combination with a dagger, taking a blow and its strength of the 8th rank. Now he was sure that having such opportunities, he could independently kill a monster with a higher rank than his. On the street, it was already getting dark and time to return home. But suddenly, Lin heard someone's cry for help. Through the remnants from the destroyed buildings, it was easy to go to another street, which Kay did. Then he saw a new familiar Shui, behind which 3 monsters fled, from which it was difficult for her to escape. Soon she managed to find one of the buildings that still had surviving walls and doors. So she decided to hide there. However, the monsters were not going to stop and went to the smell of man. So they broke the windows with their rotten hands. At that moment, the girl was ready to say goodbye to her own life and was sure that she had come to an end. But suddenly she heard that the sounds of the monsters had stopped, and a rather familiar voice seemed to her, who asked her to come out. Then, with fear inside, she nevertheless opened the door and saw Lina Qi there, holding a temporary crystal in her hands. Now he was interested in the question of why the girl still has not returned home, and because of which the monsters were chasing her. Shui said that on the way she hired a knight to take her back to Minxuan, but she could not even think that it would be so dangerous. The husband's motorcycle broke down and a bunch of temporary zombies attacked them, so she was given only to run. However, from all this story, Lina was most interested in exactly where the girl got to return. At that moment, she began to be very nervous. She never managed to deceive the guy, because he clearly heard about the city of Minjuan, so he decided to assume something. In his opinion, the delivery of the subject was only the reason, since the girl wanted Lin to accompany her to Minjuan, and did all this because delivery was cheaper than accompaniment. And it was Lina who chose, because he does not have transport, and it is easier to follow him. Sui's behavior was quite suspicious, so she began to say that Kay was thinking about all nonsense and conspiracies. Suddenly, the guy held out his hand closer to the girl, and she was very scared that she jumped as much as he jumped. Then she fell sharply to the ground and began to beg that Lin would not beat her. At that moment, he realized that his assumption was true. However, he was not going to do anything bad and extended his hand to help. Then he invited Rala to return to the city. Sui was still quite distant, but agreed to go together, as it was quite dangerous to walk alone. On the way, she spoke about the traveler knight who shaved her to accompany her in Minjuan. His level was the 8th, but most likely the man was already dead. Zhu said that the knight was called Hu Yue, and it was at that moment that Lin suddenly stopped after hearing. He realized that most likely we were talking about Uncle Ho, who was his good acquaintance. In addition, the man was a good teammate for 2 months, and the motorcycle, which Lina had to sell, repaired. Over the years, Kay witnessed deaths of countless people, both familiar and unfamiliar, so he managed to get used to it. During the way Lin and Shu tried to reach the border with the city, there were still many monsters at them, but the guy managed to fight back. As soon as they reached the control point, Kay prepared his certificate so that Uncle Liu would miss him. Shu Wei was unhappy with the new city. In her opinion, everything was launched in Zhuangzhou, and people were not friendly to foreigners. At each border crossing, it was necessary to pay in 3 days. But Lin also knew a little about Minhuan, where all strangers needed to give a fee in the amount of 5 days of their lives. However, the girl did not know about such details, since she was a radical resident of this city, and such questions did not concern her. After the last words, Sui pressed the button that was on her unusual suit, through which it was difficult to discern her appearance. As it turned out, a dress with the possibility of a moisture-proof mode, which was not too comfortable for long-term use, was wearing a knife. Now Lin could not take his eyes off his new acquaintance, which showed her true essence. And Kei explained that before he simply did not notice how much the girl had a beautiful figure, and that she was quite beautiful by nature. However, without lingering on the topic of appearance, Lin said that the bridge was broken, and the alternative route leads through the dead zone. Despite this, the guy had friends who knew this area very well and could help. Indeed, after firestorms, the ecology was destroyed, and most of the territory outside the city turned into a desert with hidden shaky sands, which became a forbidden zone. But Sui was sure that she would cope on his own. Despite this, Lin nevertheless informed her her home address where she could seek help. Then he said goodbye to the girl and went more to his sister, being in a raised mood after a successful hunt. And Sui decided that she should return as soon as possible, and better die at the hands of her own mother than in the thickets of Zhuangzhou. Meanwhile, Lin decided to first visit the hospital and find out about the condition of the younger sister. But as soon as Ping came closer to the building, one of the patients who begged for help began to run out of there. He turned to everyone around and said something about the fact that there were still people in the hospital who needed to be saved. At that moment, Lin realized that his sister could be in danger and should take a chance to get inside the room. Without wasting time, the guy went directly to the center of the possible apocalypse, which was foreshadowed by patients. He immediately found the ward of his sister, which was connected to artificial respiration, since after the accident she could not do it on his own. However, fortunately, everything was fine with her, and the girl continued to lie under the supervision of doctors and droppers. Now Lin calmed down relative to the sister, to which the monsters who could rebel from the morgue did not reach. Suddenly, the director of Van ran into the ward, who, during the last meeting with Kay, deceived him for his own benefit. This time he had the same plan, and asked the guy to immediately save him from the monsters who were chasing him. However, Lin was already offended by the fat man and asked if he really thinks that he would really help him and believe his word. But this time, the man was really sure of his own promises and touched his hands. Kay announced that he would give him back 300 days. After their handshake, the young man's watch replenished for another 300 days, so this time it was possible to trust the doctor. Lin realized that the man was seriously scared if he gave all the payment so quickly and did not doubt it. However, it was important for the guy to find out what exactly was happening in the hospital. As it turned out, due to the lack of financing, the director could not allow his department to process dead bodies. The corpses rebelled. and it was clear that all this was due to his own greed of the director, who took all the allocated money to himself. In a matter of seconds, the monsters have already reached the ward, where Lin was located. There were many of them, since the morgue of the hospital was crowded. The guy had no choice but to activate the combustible dagger with the system. Then he was ready to independently rush into the crowd of monsters, eager for the death of all people. Having a serious weapon and good use of it, Lin waving his hands in all directions and defeated the monsters. They were like garbage, as they had a rather low level of force against K, so they were not a serious problem for him. In less than a minute, the knight managed to defeat more than 5 zombies and return without a single wound. Meanwhile, the director of Van continued to sit motionlessly on the floor and breathe heavily, as if he was very injured. But at some point, the same temporary crystal that all monsters had in his chest began to form in his chest, and Lin was still rejoiced by his prey in the form of nuclei, which he could now convey to his sister so that she recovered faster. But unexpectedly, for such a calm minute of rest, Director Van rushed to the young man from behind and was ready to tear him like a beast. However, the guy managed to evade in time, since his ear was always sharp to extraneous sounds due to the conditions in which he lives. At that moment, Lin realized that this ruthless doctor also turned into a temporary zombie right behind him. As it turned out, the man had more than 20,000 days in the account, so he did not turn because of his natural death. After all, natural death was due to old age or illness that occurred over time. In this case, at least turn time into life. But the probability of that is small. An accidental death or fatal injury, this is because of which a person dies until the end of time, despite the presence of days. During such death, the more days a person remained, the more power he will have in the image of a zombie. And from the calculation of all this time, if the transformation was completed, the director of Van could be incredibly strong. Therefore, it must be killed because it will completely turn. Otherwise, it will become a disaster for the city. At that moment, Lin ordered the system to activate the boots and sleeves in order to immediately strike a blow that destroys the mountains. Then he quickly tried to hit the monster directly into the chest, which eventually ended unsuccessfully. As it turned out, he managed to activate the lock, so it was now very difficult to get its hourly core from the chest. Due to the strength that was present in his body, Lina pushed it off to the wall, because of which the guy began to cough with blood. Key understood that the force corresponding to the rank of the monster was terrible, and now he had no chance to win in the near duel. Another option was to turn to a new temporary system and open a store in which an additional gun could be found. Many of the possible functions for Lina were still blocked, as he was a new user of the system. This was the unpleasant news for the carrier, but it was necessary to choose one of the possible options as soon as possible. Then the system announced the presence of a gun with a strong shot. The advanced weapon was quite powerful, but it cost 500 days. But the guy had no choice, as the monster continued to turn. Then he bought a healing potion and a pistol with a strong shot from the system. The guy quickly confirmed the purchases that, in total, had to spend 600 life days from him. But given the fact that due to internal damage, Kay quickly lost seconds and minutes, it was vital. There was little time, and the monster began to run directly to Lina, so the latter immediately drank the potion and activated the improved pistol. Then he directed the barrel at the zombie and shook him right in his chest without hesitation, because of which he flew right into the wall. Meanwhile, several auxiliary detachments with knights were delivered to the hospital building, who were waiting for instructions. Among them was Li Zhang, a knight of glory, who was a captain. The man ordered to report the circumstances according to which 5 temporary zombies began bustle. The captain ordered to immediately block all the exits and kill the monsters. After all, from them you can create dozens of time crystals. Suddenly, strong shots began to come from the hospital, which attracted the attention of others outside. At that moment, Li Zhang ordered his subordinates Jin Yang and Xiao Min to follow him and prepare weapons. The man rushed to the hospital and had to immediately find out who got into his hands with firearms. Soon, additional services began to call in the call hospital in order to reduce the number of victims and speed up the mission. And the first group was already going inside, where it came across another crowd of monsters that continued to come to life. Li Zhang assistants had high-quality weapons, so with one shot they could get rid of the zombie. All knights would be aimed specifically in the thoracic region of monsters, thanks to which they could exist even without food. From the bullets received, temporary crystals immediately crashed before falling into the hands of the Knights of Fame. Li Zhang was worried because the code said that when meeting with temporary zombies, the priority was to pick up their crystal, but according to his partner, this did not matter. After all, even if they manage to get a nucleus, they will still confiscate it. However, the captain recalled the shots that were heard on the east side of the third floor, so he decided to independently go. But before leaving, he ordered his assistants to stay in place and continue to shoot the monsters. Then the man ran along the corridors, but tried to take his steps invisible so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Nevertheless, the captain managed to accurately find the place from which he heard shots. It was there that he found a huge dead zombie. Li Zhang was very surprised when Lina K saw at the murder site, who had not had such sharp actions before, and the guy was afraid that someone found him. So he quickly crushed a strong temporary crystal in his hands, which belonged to the director Van. After that, he came closer to Li and explained that his sister was in this hospital, so he immediately appeared at the scene. But the captain was most interested in how the young man managed to neutralize the monster, which had a fairly high level. But Lin could not talk about his new capabilities, so he lied that the zombie had not yet been transformed, and he simply took advantage of the moment. However, Zhang knew that even when the transformation was unfinished, the monster still belonged to the class with, and a lot of effort was required for his victory. But the young man himself wanted to translate the topic and asked Uncle Li why he also ended up in this hospital so quickly. The man explained that he was transferred to the Knights of Fame half a month ago, and now he is responsible for this area. Suddenly, another monster appeared, which prevented the conversation of two colleagues. He deftly rushed at June, and he did not notice this. However, Lin had acute vision, so he reacted in time and ordered his uncle to evade zombies. After that, the guy took out his new weapons, and with a clear sight fell directly into the chest of the monster. Zhang also decided not to stand in vain and took advantage of military equipment to neutralize the monster. Then he grabbed his weapon and again directed him into the chest of zombies to end him to the end. But before clicking on the trigger, he examined the villain's body and noticed that he already had a severe wound, which is not characteristic of his weapons. Therefore, after he turned to Lin and asked if the young man had already reached the 8th level, to which he received a positive answer. In addition, Lin offered his help, but according to Li, it was the work of exclusively Knights of Glory, so the conversation will end later. Kay had no need to stay in this place, since now his sister was under the protection of other knights, and most monsters were already killed. 10 minutes later, the captain reported the situation and said that 63 people were killed by an unnatural death, but 28 crystals were transformed. Now the loss rate of the rate is more and more. Meanwhile, Lina needed medical care, since several transformed crystals fell into his hand. But despite minor injuries, crystals returned him a lot of resources for recovery. Whether Zhang soon released his colleagues and his own doctor, who always came to calls with the detachment. Now a man could calmly talk with his younger partner and ask him exciting questions. Most of all, he was interested in where the guy took out that gun. Indeed, in this world, long-range weapons, which have great mortality, must be numbered and strictly regulated. But without hearing a specific answer, the captain advised Lina to hide the gun as best as possible, because when someone else sees it, there may be problems. In addition, the system itself is notified of caution and desirable not to use such weapons with outsiders. Suddenly, the captain recalled the situation that occurred 6 months ago. Then Lina's sister got into an accident, and the guy wrote a long leave statement to look after the girl. The man was sure that Kay would not sit still, but did not expect that the young man would surpass him. At that moment, Lin felt awkwardly, so he began to say that he was still very far from the captain. But then he added that it would not be possible to pass at the same time to engage in training and look at his sister. So he spends his time in vain? Because it so happened that a recruiter's training camp is being carried out in the jail training camp. So at the initiative of Zhang, Lina should try. When the guy heard about this news, he even held his breath. Previously, he could dream of a training camp. Because in the face of a constantly growing apocalyptic crisis, it is important to develop truly strong people. 5 years ago, the highest leadership decided to create a training camp. Those who were chosen received the best treatment and resources. Every year, a single set is carried out to the jail camp, and only special young people under the age of 18, who have exceptional talents, are selected. Lin also participated last year, but, unfortunately, did not pass. Now the guy was thinking about the fact that if he still manages to get to the camp, then not only he himself would be under guard, but also his family. And if the knight is chosen, then his sister will be able to be treated in an exclusive hospital in the research center. Thus, he will no longer have to take care of her safety. Uncle John was confident in the power of the young man, but now he had to do something, so he decided to go first. And Lin, having support from the elder, was now even more motivated and sought to go to the camp. Jinka, once a luxurious area, was now almost deserted because he was badly injured due to the fact that he was on the outer outskirts of the city. At the present time, there were much more buildings than people, so you could live in any of them. Lin chose a place inside the quarter, on the lower floor, to have more time to react in case of danger. He freely entered the apartment that he liked. There was a good repair and a lot of furniture, so you could live. Soon, the guy came to the conclusion that it was in his chest to be unbearable, and it seems that he was used to him. Therefore, having the opportunity to finally take a hot shower, the young man went primarily to the bathroom and relaxed a little there. After that, he found a suitable clothes for him, remaining from the old owners of the apartment, and went to inspect the new property. Closing the door to the bathroom, he turned to the system and asked it to open his store. The effect of the healing potion was good, but also effective, like a 200-day bottle of healing potion, which was sold on the street. But in the system, there was a rule that he could only use what he has redeemed for himself, since otherwise, he will be able to earn time by selling the potion. To get the right to live in the external field, it is necessary to make a deposit of 300 days per person, which was enough for Lin and his sister to move. Therefore, having calculated everything, he decided to use the remains of days to quickly update. In a matter of seconds, he managed to rise to 2 levels in a row. His control over force has already been a little weakened, so until he could increase his strength. Therefore, while he decided to try first to raise the level of his abilities and chose a psychotropic potion, it can be used to improve mental abilities, with the help of which it is possible to further increase the strength of skills, and also there was meditation of the starry sky, but its price was 2,000 days. But Lena did not have such funds. But in any case, the guy ordered the system to buy his psychotropic potion and postpone it. But the bottle of such a potion cost 500 days and could not raise the power of his mind to the 2nd level. Therefore, the young man decided not to give up and ordered the system to repeat the purchase of this potion in order to still achieve his goal. After that, the system sent a message with congratulations to an increase in the level of mind strength and a chance to play the lottery. To increase the level to the 2nd, 2 bottles of the potion of the spirit were needed. So now Lena became clear why the meditation is so expensive. But without money, he could not buy it. But in any case, there were good news, because with an increase in its indicator, the carrier could play the lottery. And as it turned out, fortunately the guy, he was very lucky, and the system played the meditation of the starry sky. In the store, this meditation cost 2,000 days, and now he could take it for himself for free. Therefore, when the strength of the mind will catch up with the level of power, the young man will become invincible, and even if he remains at the level of D, he can still defeat the highest enemies. But without wasting time, Lin decided to quickly move on to the test of meditation of the starry sky. Soon, his body began to be filled with a special energy that came to him thanks to meditation. Suddenly, this process was interrupted by a knock on the door of the room, which was quite unexpected. Because in this post-apocalyptic world, the marginal zone is very dangerous due to poverty. Thieves are often found that take time by deception. Lin had to be as careful as possible and asked for exactly who was behind the door. As it turned out, it was Shui. The guy was surprised at such a meeting and, not knowing how to start a conversation, asked the girl how to do her. Shui was upset and said that Lin had previously allowed her to contact him in the case when help was needed. Then she entered the apartment and said that a traveler named Jiao, who had a motorcycle, said that she could deliver her back to her hometown intact for 200 days. However, the money asked forward. After the girl was fully paid, he told her to wait in place. They say he went to drive a motorcycle and then just disappeared. Lin did not understand why Shui allowed herself to deceive and contacted the knight not through the warrant, but directly, and she said that she had completely little time left and had no choice but to come to this apartment. Lin noted that he remembers the lost product and partial payment, so he will definitely return the balance. After that, Kay did not wait for another moment and immediately gave 100 days that he had in order to also leave himself a little. But the girl sad again and said that she still could not return to her city. Kay understood that if not for her, now he would not have a system and he would be in a similar position. Suddenly he remembered that Shui fighter, so he asked what kind of level she owns. As it turned out, her rank was the 5th. Then Lin suggested that in the case when the girl herself wants it and will have the strength, he can introduce her to people who will help her find work among the knights. And Sui has long tried to work so far to close all her expenses. But in the end, she decided that it was too difficult to find a good job. Then Kay said that his sister fell into a car disaster and is unconscious. so he is a portrait person who can take care of her and protect. Shui immediately agreed to the proposal, but for starters, she needed to go through a check for strength. She was sure of her own dexterity, so she warned Lena to be careful, saying she would not regret him. But as soon as she rushed to the attack, the guy put her a bandwagon, because of which Shui stumbled. Then she fell strongly and did not even have time to group, so that the fall was not so painful. The girl almost began to cry and told Lena that it was unculturally treating women. But Kay knew that the psychic practices the power of the mind, which enhances the ability to manipulate the mind of a person. To achieve physical strength, people enhance physical strength, strengthening their body and teach new techniques. However, with a strong body and without a combat base, one cannot be a real fighter who can cope with difficulties. Therefore, without hiding the truth, he said that Shui was too weak, and it is very strange that she managed to get out of the building, not being seen by the clock zombies. Then Wei smiled and replied that she had a thing that makes her invisible. However, this only works on temporary monsters, which are stronger than its 3 levels. But Lin said that he does not have to know about all her secrets, so there is no need to tell. Then he thought, and said that from tomorrow the girl would be responsible for his sister's departure. Her daily salary will be 2 days. Although such a fee was high even for the external field, under normal circumstances, the daily salary of ordinary people was 35 hours. Quickly coordinating all the details of the work, Lin opened the door and told the girl that he would wait for her the next day in the morning. But Sui was also interested in living, because she drew attention to the fact that Kay lived alone and had quite a few rooms. But the guy wondered where Vei lived before, if she needs a sleeping place now. As it turned out, she quite often spent the night in the 5-star Silton Hotel, where payment for accommodation per day was 10 days. But before offering to live with him, Lin still asked if the girl was afraid to stay with him in the same apartment. But she believed him and saw a good person. Moreover, if Kay wanted to harm her, he would have done it for a long time. Lena liked the sincerity of the girl, so he smiled and said that she could stay with him. The next day, the city continued to survive. Many buildings were re-destroyed and fires rose there. But on the border with the city, the guard was around the clock, so the monsters had a small chance to get inside. In the morning, Lin and Shu Wei had to go to the city to get to the hospital. The guy was most interested in whether after the last incident intensified security. Having talked a little with their old colleagues, the couple passed control and quickly reached the hospital building. The chamber under the number of 311 is exactly the one where Lena's sister was, and it was this room that received significant damage after the last shots. Kay spent his new friend in the ward and said that her task was to look after the girl, and a few days later he will hire another employee who can be on duty with Shu. As it turned out, there are nurses in the hospital, but they are ordinary people, and if the second incident occurs, as the one that was before, even 10 nurses will not be enough to kill an hourly zombie. But Shu Wei was confident in her own abilities and asked Lena not to worry. Therefore, he went to finish other things and promised to come later. First, he went to the entrance to the external area. There was no camp of the camp in the extreme, so the guy first needs to get into the external if he wants to take a selection. Therefore, before going to the camp, the participant must present his hours and the number of days on them. Access to the external zone was opened only for people who have at least 300 days on the account of at least 300 days, to prevent the penetration of desperate people whose time is about to be rejoiced. Thus, this effectively reduces crime in this area. The guards made an audit and calmly missed Lena, as there were the right number of days on his hour watch. The guy quickly reached the main core of the Judgment Day camp, which he dreamed about so much. This time he confidently told himself that he would surely cope with all the tasks. At the main entrance, there was already a turn to the commission, which accepted the documents of the participants in her camp. Then Lin took out all the pieces of paper and first provided an identity card that said that the guy was one of the knights. Suddenly, an expensive car drove near the line, which, in spite of people, was ready to go right along them. At the wheel sat a pompous young man who believed that everyone should skip him and not become an obstacle to the path. After all, cars in this city were considered a symbol of the time when Xinchuan resisted a temporary zombie. And if a person can afford a car, then he is definitely unusual. For this man, there were no rules for parking and rules for respect for others. It was a special pleasure for him to demonstrate his status. When the car stopped in the parking lot, the doors from both front seats opened, so that Guy was not alone. First, he got out of the car, and then the fragile, dear lady, who will be his companion for this day. The man actually behaved obscenely and tried to publicly touch the body of his girlfriend, who was not anyway on the people around him. But according to the young man, Next to him, she did not need to pay attention to extraneous glances and just enjoy life. Other guys in the crowd began to discuss the stranger, and as it turned out, his name was Zhao Qinan. Even before he was 18 years old, he already served as a captain in a detachment of travelers. Lin heard this information and was very surprised that at such a young age, someone could reach the rank, so that it is a captain of the knights. However, according to one of the strangers, in fact, Jiao had the 8th level of rank D, which corresponded to the rank of Lina. Now Kay had even more questions. After all, there is a mandatory requirement that a person has a level C to become the captain of any unit of knights. But according to passers-by, Jiao did not pay attention to the laws. For him, the captain's place was nothing when he was the second son of the Jiao family from the inner region. Suddenly, an insight came to Lin, and he remembered that when Shu Wei talked about a traveler who deceived her for money, she called a similar name. Therefore, now the guy wanted to check this information and decided to photograph the captain and send his friend. As it turned out, Shui without hesitation immediately recognized the fraudster, because of which she had to run away from the monsters on her own. 10 minutes later, Zhao Jian, who was deputy commander of the knights, came to the guys. In addition, this person took exams in the camp, among which there were 3 tests. The first was to verify physical training. All candidates had to follow him. The members of the order were divided into 4 classes in an increase in the rank: knight, captain, commander, and master. Therefore, everyone respected people of the highest position. Zhao Jian ordered all students to line up in a row so as not to create crowds and observe discipline. A physical test was held on the 2nd floor. It was a comprehensive check of speed, strength, and reflexes. It was forbidden to use accelerated weapons and other methods. In the test, it was necessary to get on a treadmill and overcome a distance of 100 meters in less than 6 seconds. And Lin so far decided to take advantage of the moment, and being close to Zhao Qinan, asked him if he had deceived someone 200 days last day. At that moment, the captain was surprised and said that he had never seen such naive girls before. Therefore, if it were not he had deceived her, then someone else would have done it. But Lin did not like such a tone of the conversation, and he asked if, in the opinion of Qinan, Shui deserved such an attitude. According to Jiao, the cost of supporting people in Manhwa was now expensive. Therefore, he was the very beginning of the 200 days suspicious. And the boy absolutely does not give a damn about the fact that Sui had 10 days left after that. He did not see anything terrible in her death, so he did not pay attention. Lina's mood was serious, and he directly said that such a person as Jiao did not deserve to be a traveler. But Qinan knew where to crush and informed Kay that he knew all the information about him and his sick sister. Therefore, it is better not to climb, so as not to make a loved one even worse. Lin kept his emotions at that moment, but he knew that such a bastard as Jiao would definitely pay him for his words. However, now the captain was not afraid of him and asked Kay if he understands what a disadvantage is now. But their conversation broke off at the moment, when one of the examiners named the name Lina, and said that he would be the following. The guy was ready for the competition, but at first he was a little bitter, so that the old injuries would not make themselves felt. He quickly jumped on the treadmill and, putting maximum efforts, began to run confidently. But his result was greatly pleased, while Lina had the highest result among all the participants present, which means a strong group was supposed to gain. The judges suspected that Kay had the 8th level, and after what they heard, Jiao longed to humiliate his opponent as soon as possible, and Pia died with shame. The next test was the measurement of the level of force. Linya managed to one of the first to go to the judges, and this time its result was 850 kilograms from the blow. The crowd was surprised at this result, because an ordinary 8th level fighter usually beats no more than 800 kilograms. The next and last test was to check the reaction of the participants. 10 machines randomly shoot 100 speedy jumping balls, so you need to avoid at least 60. Lin was ready, since his life experience from work in nights allowed to be careful even in such a test. Therefore, as soon as the balls began to fall from different sides right from the ceiling, Kay very cleverly went around each of them. At first, in a matter of seconds, he managed to dial 60 goals, which was already a satisfactory result to go further. But he decided not to dwell on this figure, and in 4 seconds he had already scored 80 goals, which caused delight among the audience. But even this did not end, because Lin still managed to gain 100 goals, which almost twice the maximum result. From what he saw, Zhao Qinan nearly exploded from envy, and was sure that this was not within the power of an ordinary knight. Some of the other participants began to suspect that the measurement machine was broken, since the maximum best result was previously 81 ball. Some didn't even have something to say, since such laughter greatly raised the bar for other participants. But in fact, besides the fact that Lin was a man with expanded physical capabilities, so he was also a psychic. With the help of mental force, he could perceive the barely noticeable movements of each machine gun and react in advance. Therefore, after the end, the guy went to the examiner Jiao and asked if he managed to hand over his first test. The commander was a little shocked, but still announced that Lin, who perfectly passed the test for physical training and has access to the next stage. Soon, all the other participants finished the passage of the first test, and it was possible to move on to the second stage of the audit. The second test was in a fight in which you can use your techniques and improvements. Further, a person whose name calls the examiner is disarmed. Two go into the ring to change their strength. The winner reaches the next round, and the loser is tracked down. Song Jiao, who fought against Liu Minjuan, was declared for the first battle. Suddenly, Zhao Chenan approached Lin and noted that the guy would soon lose to him and find out about his real place. Qi was surprised that the impudent is so sure that they would become in the ring against each other. And there was no reason. But after the first pair in the battle, the examiner announced the next pair. These were Zhao Chenan and Lin Ke. It seemed strange to the knight that among the 40 people who had to compete, Zhao realized that they would be put in pair. Suddenly, the young man drew attention to the fact that the surname of the examiner and his enemy was the same. Therefore, their relationship was unusual. But he was sure that in the face of real and ordinary power, all the tricks were losing their meaning. Chenan was sure that he would win. But Lin told him directly that he would not disgrace the reputation of the knights. Such phrases only added more motivation for Jiao, so he longed for a bloody victory over the enemy. Without waiting for an officially starting battle, the bastard suddenly rushed at Lina and immediately prepared his strong blow. But at some point, their fists touched each other and did not make it possible to go further than the conditional field between them. Jiao tried to hold on, but was surprised how the blow that could be the same, or even stronger than his own. Then Lin smiled and said that now the show would only begin, so do not upload all its trump capians. Now who wanted to use a fist for the first time, breaking the mountains for the first time? So far it was the best function of the system that did not seem suspicious to others. But Jiao also did not hesitate, and took advantage of his skillful blow to the tiger, thanks to which the fiery silhouette of the animal formed behind him. At some point, when the two extreme capabilities of the fighters crossed, special energy was formed on the battlefield. Something reminded the big explosion between two strong fighters, and one of them still had to suffer from this. This time, Zhao Chenan turned out to be weaker when he almost burst into tears from an unexpected turn. But Lin decided not to give up on a small victory, and decided to accelerate well in order to demonstrate something else. At that moment, he quickly found himself near the already injured Jiao and began to finish him with fists to accurately neutralize. Ke was an extremely clever young man, so in a matter of seconds, he could be in the opposite corner of the battlefield. In the end, he managed to put the enemy and prove his own strength, so this time he was again the winner. But Jiao tried to understand why during the passage of the first test for force, his enemy did not show all the possibilities. Meanwhile, Lin told the villain that with such force, he could not even kill the zombies of his level. But in fact, the fact that he became the captain of the knights is simply a humiliation of the dignity of his team. Jiao could not tolerate such humiliations and gathered his strength. He wanted to rush again to close his mouth. But at some point, Lin noticed that the enemy's movements were slowed for him, so he could easily evade. Physical power can strengthen the body, and the strength of the mind can give the fighter reading movements that are invisible to ordinary people. Therefore, for Lin Ke, all the movements of his enemy were as if in a slow shoot, because of which the task was facilitated. As for Jiao, Lin approached him and asked how he still manages to rise after such blows. For Chenan, the moose was a miracle that a guy with an 8th level could be so strong and indestructible against him. Now the loser had no choice but to use additional resources and secret methods. Therefore, the guy took out his ring on which there was a stone that was easily starred, and under it there was something sharp, similar to the needle. At that very moment, he again rushed at Lina, who already laughed at the stubbornness of his enemy, fiercely trying to win. But suddenly Kei's gaze fell on the ring, or rather a poisoned needle, which he had previously heard about the method of use. The guy had no choice but to intercept Zhao's hand in the highest zone, so as not to be wounded by this decoration. Then Lin managed to transfer Chenan and again neutralize him from such a wave of official selection. Therefore, after this, who immediately turned to the examiner and announced suspicion of fraud. Suddenly, the commander of Jiao appeared and discarded Lina said that he was suspended from this stage of the competition. According to the elder, it was Lin himself who resorted to the use of a poisoned needle. since the decoration was near the guy himself. Now Kay did not understand what he was accused, since he clearly saw a needle on one of Shanann's fingers. While the commander helped his relative, he only did what he looked like the victim, although he actually hid an ominous smile. But Lin actually saw the very ring that now lay at his feet and could indicate use. The examiner again repeated his order regarding the disqualification, and he himself went a liar away from the battlefield. At that moment, Lina's gaze changed, and he immediately realized that an act of conspiracy was just taking place against him between two relatives. Other participants began to discuss what happened. And in addition to the accusations of Lin Kay, they also mentioned the fact that the pseudo-captain of the Knights for some reason is still at a low level and is too weak. And Lin himself decided not to leave this matter just like that, and took advantage of the confidence of people with a relatively poisoned needle on the ring. He went to his things and took out the phone, voicing that now he could quickly prove everything to the audience. On his phone there was a photo that he sent for Shui, and there it was clearly visible a ring on his enemy's hand. Suddenly people really realized that the ring belongs to Jiao Qinan and should rethink the whole situation. And that moment the villain's face changed, and he turned to the commander with the question of how this could happen. Now the examiner had no choice but to pick up his words back and apologize to the Linum. Then he indicated a specific time when he would wait for the guy to conduct the third test. The teacher felt inconvenient, since he had to use his position to help Qinan. But Lin thought about the fact that this person is quite strong, and his level at least the fourth from the rank. But Jiao Qinan could not calm down and went to Kay said that this was not the end, and they would meet later. However, the knight decided so far to leave everything as it is, as a precaution, but later to take accounts with the villain after passing the third test. Therefore, having finished this stage the winner and proved the truth to everyone, the guy went to restore strength for the next competition. But Qinan turned to his brother Jiao and said that he was eager for revenge and wants to get help from the elder. It was still quite early, and Lin had already managed to cope with the first two stages of tests for the best camp day camp. Waiting for the third stage, he decided to find some cafe to slightly reduce the time there. Not far from the main building of the camp, there was a coffee shop, where Lin decided to take a little bite and get additional energy. Quite quickly, the guy coped with his meal and drank coffee, so you could move on. But it was quite boring to wait on the street. Then, after sitting a little more, he decided to pay off for a delicious snack and go in search of something else. It seemed strange to him that more than 2 hours had passed since the moment he left the court day. Therefore, in order to find out the question of why not one of the applicants is visible on the street, Lin decided to approach someone and find out more. The guy turned to the body of the corps and said that he came to pass the third stage of recruiters. But for some reason there is still no one. The man was surprised and informed that the place for the competition was changed. The new place is located near the western wall. Lin did not understand why no one told him. But according to the guard, all participants should have received a text message on the phone. Then the guy looked at the phone and became convinced that there was no message. So the problem was again in the examiner who must pay for his behavior. Lin knew where exactly he needed to run, but there were only 16 minutes to catch the competition. Meanwhile, all participants were recalculated near the western wall, and it was noticed that there are still no two of them. At that moment, the examiner said that there were only 2 minutes left, and everyone who came later will be counted as disqualified. One of the spectators asked why Jiao Qinan was next to the team, but he was advised to better not discuss this issue. Meanwhile, this Qinan thanked his older brother for his help, since now he will take Lina's place. In addition, the guy longed for revenge even after the exam. Namely, he planned to find Kay and arrange a grandiose fight. But unexpectedly for these two, Lin still managed and was not late for a minute, as he took advantage of high-speed shoes. It was thanks to them that the speed of the knight was accelerated by 50%, and now there was no chance to win so easily for Jiao. The brothers were very angry with the appearance of their common enemy, but Qinan was sure that he could win on their own. Then his elder brother again said that after time, all the late would be disqualified, and Jiao Qinan, without additional discussions, will become in the place of the person who still did not appear in competitions. Lina was disgusted from all this lies and the fact that even such a camp could be discredited because of such people. The examiner said that the third competition provides for the fact that the participants will travel outside and kill temporary zombies. They do not have the right to use an improved gun, only what provides for the exam. All weapons will be stored in the cabinet, and if during the competition something forbidden is noticed, that participant will have problems with the administration. When Lin came closer to the closet with the weapon, he realized that he was quite primitive and not special, so there may be some complications, but the participants had no other choice. so everyone had the same shape and a weapon similar to each other, like sharp knives. The students did not have much time, as they were specifically put on critical conditions in order to accurately check for endurance. Therefore, soon the whole group, they approached the border with the city of Jinwei, where the guards were waiting for them. On the border, the examiner said that there are a lot of time zombies in this area, and each of them has its own personal number. After the participant kills one of them, he must use the scanner on the arm that will save information about this. Each scanner gives an additional score, so the higher the score, the more chances the last exam will be passed. The participants were given 10 minutes to prepare, and it was reported that the exam itself will last an hour, and the 10 best players will pass. Lin understood that he spent a lot of effort, so he should recover. He knew that the strength of the mind was restored by thinking and physical breathing. Meanwhile, Zhao Qinan had already managed to agree with his friends so that they would take care of his enemy and are unlikely to have problems, since everyone was sure that Lin had an 8th level. Zhao decided to motivate friends with improved weapons, so he announced exactly where it is. Now everyone was sure that going against Zhao, everyone would earn huge problems which is better not to meet. 10 minutes later, the examiner announced the end of the time to prepare and the beginning of the competition itself. The participants immediately divided into small teams and began to analyze the territory to find monsters. They tried to behave quietly so as not to be noticed by the zombies, but it was necessary to move quite quickly. The entire exam was given only an hour, so you need to work in emergency modes and attach the effort to work as much as possible. Soon Lin reached the 9th building. Now the houses here were simply numbered, not wearing more beautiful names of residential complexes. Entering inside, the guy stumbled upon the first zombie, which was rather weak in physique. Lin immediately realized that this monster of the 3rd level, therefore, was equal to ordinary garbage, which would be easy to cope with. At some point, the monster nevertheless heard the steps of a man behind him and turned around, showing a terrible face. However, Lin was much more agile, and with just one movement he managed to break through the chest of the monster behind. Despite the fact that now the examination task, temporary crystals were still quite valuable material, so Kay did not miss the opportunity to use them. And after that, I did not forget to scan the monster, after which he counted 3 points, and he was in 3rd place. The guy was sure that with his strength, he would be able to enter the top 10 strongest and go through this test. But the problem was in the absence of improved weapons, since the relatives of Jiao wanted to annoy the guy as much as possible. So he needs to be careful. Since there was no weapon, there was always a system at hand, which had its own store for the carrier. This time he liked the function of a swift jerk. In an instant, the owner can break away from an extraordinary speed. It cost 500 days, and given that Lin had almost 1,500, he agreed without hesitation to the purchase. After each acquisition of weapons or skills from the store, it had to be invested in the body of the owner of the system. It was at that moment that the guy felt a special energy that passed it with every muscle. In order not to waste time in vain, he decided to immediately awaken the root and experience a new supervisoriness. He managed to move from one corridor to another in a second, leaving only a gust of wind behind him. After the first use, Lin was barely able to stop, as he did not yet know how to use this correctly. However, after that, he realized that this function gave him an acceleration at least twice to his usual speed. The only thing that acceleration lasted only a second, and it was possible to use it only with an interval for a whole minute. Now he needed to go upstairs of another building and analyze the situation from above. While he went up to the roof, on the way he managed to kill 2 more monsters and use with a temporary crystal. In addition, thanks to the murder, he earned 5 more points. But according to the table of the participants, he was still in 3rd place, since everyone there were quite capable. Zhao Qinan was still in 12th place, and Lina was clear that the guy would never play honestly, which means he had his own plan. But while the knight was thinking about how to earn more points, the corner of his ear he heard that someone was trying to rush at him from behind. He managed to quickly evade and stay on his feet, as Kay was quite close to the edge of the roof of a high-rise building. The stranger continued his attempts to end the linos, but he was quite careful and adhered to a safe distance, and the other participant decided to jump to the other edge of the square, and was waiting for his partner to cope together. When Lin was at a safe distance, prepared weapons and asked why they decided to attack him, suddenly another accomplice appeared and asked his brother why he did not take advantage of the acceleration during the first attack. Lin was pretty angry because of this reason, so the guys asked who they were and why they decided to attack him. Without extra words, one of the attackers replied that Kay had crossed the road and now had to pay for his words. At that moment, the knight realized that we were talking about Zhao Qinan, who apparently in this way decided to remove his enemy. Lin Ke became in the rack and began to think. He realized that among 20 participants, only twin brothers can be with the same surname. After that, the guy looked at them and said that if he was right, then they are Liu Wen and Liu Wu, and the man who has fallen, and obviously Zhao Chenan. Two brothers differed very weakly from each other, and probably the most expressive difference was that their bangs looked in different directions. Liu Wen said that there was nothing like that he had guessed, because they are outside the city and does not fall under the effect of existing laws. The guy pulled out a powerful sword in front of him, and said that Zhao Chenan wants only his leg, but they receive too much service from him. Therefore, one leg is not enough for them. After that, he said that they would simply present his life on a dish. Lin Ke smiled, because he realized that the words of the brothers were really true. He understood that since they were outside the city, then if he kills them, then he would not be anything for it. Liu Wen was embarrassed and said that he probably did not understand the situation. However, Lin Ke looked aside and said that it was they who did not understand anything. Liu Wu pulled out his blades from the gloves, which also clearly did not look simple, and told his brother to stop chatting with him because they had to start action. His brother agreed with this and said that it was time to teach the main character. Suddenly, Lin Ke opened his eyes widely as if he saw something. The guy shouted abruptly behind them and told them to be carefully shouting the name Zhao Chenan. Naturally, both brothers instantly turned their heads with an effort to see their benefactor. However, at that moment, Liu Wen called his second brother and told him to be careful. As it turned out, Lin Ke took advantage of this false maneuver in order to reduce the distance with the help of a rapid jerk and attack his enemy. The man did not even have time to do anything as he was hit in his stomach. Pulling back, blood began to flow from his mouth, and he could not but comment on the speed of the guy. Nevertheless, at that moment, Liu Wen did not beat the bucks, and swinging his big sword, he jumped up, intending to cause damage to the main character until he could dodge. However, Lin Ke was much more agile than his brother expected, and jumped away from the place of collision. As a result, the roof of the building on which they were literally twice due to the strength of the sword. Liu Wen began to support his second brother and asked Lion in order. Liu Wu said that he was fine and said to kill the main character. Accordingly, Liu Wen got angry even more, and swinging his big sword told the main character to die. Lin Ke squinted and closed his teeth. He perfectly understood that this sword, which went to his first brother, was very strong. Nevertheless, he just as well understood that while his sword does not hurt him more than some kind of trinket. As a result, Lin Ke decided to accept a more cautious strategy, evading all the blows. Liu Wen waved his sword both horizontally and vertically, but all his blows were slow enough so that the guy was calmly dodged from them. Lin Ke squinted and understood the reason why everything was so easy. According to their movements, it was clear that they never left the city and never fought with temporary zombies, because of which they lacked experience and their attacks had many gaps. Because of such gaps, Lin Ke hit the gap of the first brother and knocked out the sword out of his hand. However, Liu Wen did not have time to react to it as the knife of the protagonist was right next to his throat. A moment later, the body of the first brother began to fall down when Lin Ke landed to the ground. Liu Wu looked with round eyes at his brother and could not help but repeat him, hoping that he was still alive. However, it was obvious that this was his biggest mistake. He did not have time to think that even with the help of united efforts they could not do anything like the knife of the protagonist ended up near his throat. Naturally, Liu Wu did not have time to react, and his body also began to fall down. After the murder of the two brothers, Lin Ke grinned and said that he did not expect such power from him, after which he hid his knife. It was obvious that the guy was in a calm state, because after the beginning of the end, all people fought for his lives, and these were far from the first villains, whom the smooth hero killed. He picked up one of the swords that belonged to his first brother, Lin Ke thought, and suggested that he was quite expensive. But he perfectly understood that if others saw him, he would be considered a fraudster. He was well aware that Zhao Chenan is in conspiracy and unites others around him in order to confront the guy. As a result, he decided to hide the sword and wait for the end of the test before taking it. Half an hour later, the evening began to fall on the city, and the sunset slowly gave its place to the evening moon. The guy checked with the help of his bracelet a place in the competition. He occupied the 4th place while in a decent separation from the 5th, which was Zhao Chenan. The guy smiled because he specifically scanned all the codes to me, and if you count, then his points should exceed the current first place by 36 points. However, he realized that it was better to keep it with him and not stand out too much. He was sure that these 28 points would be enough to take a place in the first 10, because until the end of the test, there were only 10 minutes, and the lagging ones simply could not catch up with this result. After that, Lin Ke looked at his clock and could not help but get enough of the number of days, which he received, although he started with only 1,000 days, which was almost 5 times less than something that he had now. The guy also understood that since he had collected a lot of time crystals in this exam, even if he fails him, then this would be a good result. Patrolman must pick up almost all the time received. It will reasonably save some crystals intact. Taking a closer look, Lin Ke realized that this time was enough to switch to the D9 level, after which he asked the system to open the store because he wanted to buy genetic potions. After that, the protagonist congratulated the systems on achieving the rank of Devosema. Looking at the boots drunk, Lin Ke could not but be upset that the transition to him cost 4 bottles, and as a result, he drank 12 bottles for almost 2,500 days. The guy could not help but notice that he was spending money very well. The system also informed him that the lottery was available to him, after which he accepted it and played a ticket. This time he was lucky for a new ability, a thunderous snake. In the description, the technique said that it uses the element of lightning in order to form a snake. After that, the guy decided to check how much this ability is in the store. Having checked that it costs as much as 15,000, that in itself was an incredibly large amount. After making sure that the ability was highly appreciated by the guy, decided to try to perform it on the roof. Very soon, Lin Ke climbed to the roof of the building and began to charge that technique. Releasing a thunderous snake, he looked more like a little snake, but it was obvious that there was a lot of strength in this attack. After that, Lin Ke directed this snake to the wall of the attic in order to test how much this attack was really strong. After the dust settled, it became obvious that this technique made a decent hole in the wall that indicated the strength of the technique. The guy smiled as he realized that he had become an order of magnitude stronger with such a trick. However, he squinted all perfectly well that it was better not to open trump cards at once, and it was better to save this equipment for later as a secret weapon. With such a harsh face, the guy began to go down the stairs of the building. When he left the building, he saw a fairly familiar face. The guy exclaimed that the world was really small. Zhao Shenan instantly deteriorated his face because he realized that 2 brothers did not take him, and the rating of the protagonist only grew all the time. In the hands of Zhao Shenan there was an ominous sword, and he said that he was too upset by his living appearance. Lin Ke said that even in such a test he was trying to cheat and called him. However, the guy was not a bald shit, told her that it could really be so. But today he will not leave this test. Lin Ke smiled and said that these were the words of a miserable and defeated person. After that, Zhao Chenan showed his sword and said that at first he wanted to deprive her of her only legs, but he himself begs for death. Lin Ke squeezed his fist and said that since there is no one nearby, then they should solve all this quickly. Zhao Chenan after that waved his sword and shouted to the main character to die. After that, the guy used his sword skill, namely the execution of the whip, from which Lin Ke simply dodged. As a result, the attack hit only a far stone, and Lin Ke smiled and said that his attempts were too slow. A moment later, the guy was right next to him and hit him because of all his strength in his stomach. Zhao Shenan went into flight and was hardly able to maintain balance by expectorant from chest pain. Lin Ke said that for such as he, even ordinary fists will be more than enough. Naturally, Zhao Chenan got angry because of the words of the protagonist, and jumping on him once again told him to shut up. The guy once again easily dodged his attack. I could not help but notice how slowly everything was for him. He perfectly understood that with his level D9, everything for him was happening as in slow shooting. After the next gate from the attack, Lin Ke began counterattack, and just a moment later, the fist of the protagonist was right next to the enemy's face. Immediately after this, Zhao Chenan's face turned into an unpleasant face. While the guy went from the blow, he could not help but tell how painfully he was covering his face with his hands. Lin Ke said that he was just his mother's son, who lives on money, parents, who are still deceiving defenseless people. He said that if he pays him with interest, otherwise he would think about leaving his life. Zhao Chenan was clearly dissatisfied, and with a terrible expression on his face assured that he would kill the protagonist. In a sense, one could say that Zhao Chenan did not fly, because he used a special feature of the sword, and used a rapid radiant incision. This would really work against any other person. However, Lin Ke was far from an unusual person and called him stupid. The guy fell forward and used the technique of destruction of the soul. Thus, he leveled him from his opponent's sword, and in return forced him to take a protective rack. Zhao Chenan did not understand how Lin Ke was able to stop the attack of improved weapons, and he literally lost his speech. Only then did Zhao Qinan guess that Lin Ke was at the level of D9, and Lin Ke asked. Really, this surprised him. He said that this is simply impossible. The guy said that according to him, he simply cannot suit this level. At that moment, Lin Ke grinned and said that there are many things that he does not know about, and he gives him 5 seconds to make the right decision. He took out a blade from a scabbard and said that he would send him on a long way. Only then, Zhao Qinan was in reality scared for his life. He began to feverishly say that Lin Ke would not dare to kill him here, because he is the son of influential and rich people, and his brother is an examiner. Nevertheless, he obviously did not expect the fact that the main characters would spit deeply on his approaching. The guy was just angry, and asked that he was the son of rich people. Drops of sweat began to fall from Zhao Qinan, and he could not help but feel that Lin Ke really wanted to kill him. At that moment, Zhao Qinan looked aside and noticed there 2 other participants in the competition. He began to scream with these 2 that Lin Ke was trying to kill him. The guy clearly did not expect strangers and was surprised at their arrival. The guy frowned because he understood that the extra eyes were only complicated. He could just attract their attention. Lin Ke squinted and rethought his actions. He thought to solve everything together with Zhao Qinan with the help of time crystals. But this plan could be cancelled with the audience. Zhao Qinan at the same time acquired some kind of confidence that at least his life would be preserved and laughed. He deliberately provoked the protagonist to kill him, realizing that if he did this, he would not be overtaken. Lin Ke squinted and asked, "Really, he really thinks?" At that moment, Zhao Qinan managed to react to the lunge of the protagonist and threatened him only to try to wound him. After that, he waved his sword horizontally, because of which Lin Ke decided to jump up. Zhao Qinan was sure that Lin Ke is not so stupid and would not kill him. This awareness gave him a remarkable self-confidence, and once again he laughed and began to ask where his character went. And was he really frightened and went to the bite? Lin Ke bent down from the next 2 strokes and said that this time he was lucky, but he would not remain unpunished. Very soon, Lin Ke grabbed his enemy by the brush, neutralizing him. Immediately after that, Lin Ke lowered Zhao Qinan down his arms down from his hands. At the same time, he waved his blade on the arm of the enemy. After one clear hit the bracelet, Zhao Qinan began to crumble. Without thinking twice, Lin Ke broke what was left of the mechanism. Only then Zhao Qinan finally realized that Lin Ke tried to do, and his face turned pale. While he was still looking at his hand where the bracelet Lin Ke was supposed to be, that in this way he could not earn points when he would kill someone. After that, the guy took out his bracelet and showed that right now, Zhao Qinan is in 10th place. The guy smiled and said that he was just left to wait for him to fly back, because he would not go back. Immediately after this, the rating showed up and someone else took 10th place. Lin Ke smiled and said that since he was the 11th, he had no hope. After that, the guy left his opponent and told him only to expect, after which he went with my road. It was obvious that Zhao Qinan could not put up with this, but he could not do anything about it either. The guy spoke to himself that Lin Ke would definitely regret and swore about it. Lin Ke squinted because he understood that the man would follow him in the near future. Therefore, it makes sense to pick up the weapon only after time. After the announcement of the results, it was said that at the end of the test, the first 10 in points will pass the 3rd stage, and all the others should return to the place of the training camp. The examiner approached his brother and said that he could not even bypass those losers who were appointed specifically so that he had passed. Zhao Qinan asked his elder what to do. Nevertheless, the examiner said dryly that he would not be able to deceive the rating, so he will be forced to wait the next time. Hearing Zhao Qinan curse the already expected answer and swore once again that he would destroy the protagonist. Nevertheless, at that moment the examiner smiled and said that it was quite possible that he would not have to stir his hands. After half an hour, 10 winners of the second test were in the jail camp. On the table lay several agreements on admission to the military day of court day, and all conditions. The examiner was in the middle of the table and once again told them to read all the points of the documents, because it is their right to sign a document or not. After that, the rest of the guys began to read conditions that could not but be exceptional. It said that after signing, they will immediately receive a bonus for 500 days, as well as all kinds of benefits. Lin Ke also read his document and squinted. He perfectly understood that the conditions are now much better than before, and this is only the first batch of recruits. The examiner shouted once again that if someone refuses to sign, then they can leave. Lin Ke understood that the examiners could calmly invent something and was aware of him. The guy once again put his eyes to the document and remembered that this camp was created by the owner of the city. One of the clauses of the agreement was special training, to which Lin Ke was obliged to prepare in advance. The guy realized that the most important thing is the fact that his sister could get good treatment, and he simply has no choice to sign or not. After watching how Lin Ke signed the document, the examiner smiled in his thoughts, calling the main character the dead man. After that, the examiner accompanied the protagonist along with other participants to the Jiao training camp, namely 600 first hostels. The man led all the participants along and shouted that each of them would receive a room from 600 and the first to 610th here, and they can decide for themselves. The examiner announced that at 8 exactly, they are obliged to gather in the training room on the top floor without reinforced weapons. Lin Ke squinted because he felt that this ordinary training would most likely be far from so simple. In the end, Lin Ke took the 606th room and began to settle down there. Having taken off his outer clothing, Lin Ke raised the phone and Shui called. The girl was glad to hear the guy and asked how he was doing with exams. Lin Ke examined the room and said that everything was fine enough. What he did not know is that one of the paintings that was masked under the sun was actually a real camera. After that, Lin Ke, without suspecting, asked how his sister feels. After the answer, Sui Lin Ke said that this was very cool, but he will not be able to come today and visit her. He obviously did not realize that all his actions and each of his sounds were shown on the examiner monitor. Without thinking twice, the man raised his phone and said that he needed to find someone. After some time, on the other side of the tube, they reported that the protagonist has a sister who lies 6 months after a heavy accident in a coma in the 9th hospital of the extreme region. After listening to the information, the examiner asked for something else. Very soon, the time approached the appointed one. It came without 10 in the evening. As the Kleinche went to the training building where there were a lot of sports equipment, Lin Ke looked around and became convinced that all other participants are also here. After some time, one of the doors on the other side opened, and unfamiliar people began to enter the hall. As it turned out, the chief instructor of the future training camp, Zhang Xun, entered the hall, and the examiner stood behind him. The man shouted to all participants to get together. When these two entered the hall, people immediately began to whisper, because the instructor was actually a very famous person. Those who did not know who he was explained that he is a personal bodyguard, a master of the level of C9, as well as the head of the knights. When Lin Ke heard this, he could not help but he did not understand why such a serious bump grabbed them into the hall. When Shram's son So climbed onto the stage and the rest of the guys gathered together, the man cleared his throat. On a smile on his face, he congratulated everyone who joined the Judgment Day camp as participants in the Phoenix program. He introduced himself as the chief instructor of the future training camp, Zhang Song. The man explained that the Phoenix project is now concentrated by the attention of the city lord, and, as the name follows from the name, he started for revival from ash. Zhang Sun also announced that despite the fact that they signed this, it does not mean that they have no way back and they can still terminate the contract and abandon any benefits at any time. After that, he looked at his colleague and said that their instructor, Zhao Jian, would be responsible for their training in the future. Lin Ke, of course, was far from being happy with such an event, and frowned, but said nothing. Zhang Xiong laid his hand on Zhao Jian and said that 10 of them would be handed over to him. He also said that he wanted him to advance them all to the level C for 3 months, with what Zhao Jian agreed. After that, Zhang Sun left the training hall. After the instructor left, Zhao Jian gathered all the participants and said that they did not have much time, so he would start with the body. He explained that today he would teach their level technology, D. Zhao Jian said that this technique belongs to the category of boxing and ordered to study it carefully. After that, he looked at the protagonist and told him to rise. Lin Ke squinted because he understood that this training camp, and behind her the place where their family could do something to him. Lin Ke confidently took a step forward to see what he was up to. Being less than a meter from the examiner, Lin Ke asked, "Really? He wants to take revenge on his brother." Zhao Jian said that although he was useless, he is his family members. Therefore, the chief hero should not contact him. Lin Ke looked into his eyes and asked what he needed. Zhao Jian said that he no longer provoke him or he recognizes the whole power of their family on himself. After that, Zhao Jian, as if nothing had happened, began to explain that the technique of which he speaks is called the tiger style, and everyone else is better to look at him in both. After that, he, without warning the protagonist, made a sharp attack forward. The guy did not expect something like that and instantly jumped back. Lin Ke could hardly dodge this blow with bent and jumping back. Even Zhao Jian himself was surprised that Lin Ke could dodge this blow and opened his eyes wide. Nevertheless, the man's attack did not end there. Spent. After that, without any warning, he activated another technique. A gust of wind, and strengthening his legs tried to attack the protagonist with them. However, despite the fact that he once again attacked, without warning, Lin Ke was already pretending something like that and jumping up. He turned around and landed at a sufficient distance from the man. Lin Ke squinted because he realized that his instructor uses improved skills against the student, which could not but be alarming. At this moment, the rest of the students began to realize that the instructor is doing something wrong, since the boxing technique should not work with the strengthening of the legs. They began to realize that the protagonist had some problems with the instructor and were wary that they should not provoke the examiner. Zhao Jian dryly said that the protagonist had good skills and squinted himself. After that, he released the protagonist and told him to go down. Lin Ke looked back at his examiner. He realized that he had stopped one simple reason: that too many people were watching him, and he would not be easy to fight vigorously. An hour later, all students did various exercises, and also tried to do something like sparring in order to hone the equipment. Students could not help but notice that this tiger style is very good, and much better than all the techniques that they knew before. At this moment, the training of students ended, and Zhao Jian announced the next meeting. However, exactly how the rest of the students practically came out, Zhao Jian smiled and said that Lin Ke would go with him. The guy was immediately wary and asked why he should do it. At that moment, Zhao Jian took out his phone and showed a video where some mercenary was in the ward with the sister of the protagonist and the tied Shui. Understanding that the main character in this way is blackmailing the guy, instantly scared. In the end, the mercenary looked far from harmless, having a knife in his hand and being right next to his dear man. The face of the protagonist instantly turned red. He called his examiner bastards and told him not even a mixture to approach his sister. Zhao Jian turned back and said that if he did not want his sister to happen to an accident, then the guy just should obey him. Lin Ke squeezed his teeth and swore. He understood that he had no choice but to save his sister. While all other students gathered back to the hostel, and the head of the sun slowly sat down, the main character had to follow the examiner. The guy was in a military elevator which slowly went down. The instructor and Lin Ke stood in the elevator quite calmly. None of them said a word. After some time, the floor indicator showed the badge. The elevator stopped and opened its doors. The instructor with a confident step began to go forward, after which he said to follow the main character. During this time, the guy checked his phone and realized that there was no network at all, so if he wants to do something with him, then he would get away with him. Nevertheless, Lin Ke was confident in his abilities, and reasoned that since he had a level of D9, and he also aroused the ability of lightning, he would be more than capable of protecting himself. The guy squinted and began to step forward. He understood that his sister was in his hands, so he needed to obey, because if he really conceived something, then his strength may not be enough. However, while Lin Ke showed to the destination, his gaze attracted something else. At Lin Ke opened his eyes wide and leaned against the shelves in shock. Frank did not understand how so many animals were preserved here. A look at them reminded the guy that his sister loved little animals very much and always wanted to grow alone. Nevertheless, due to the temporary explosion, the ecology of the planet was broken and the animals were almost completely extinct. In these times, people can no longer afford to grow pets. I looked at the black cat near which was a sign with the name 100 days. Probably its price. Lin Ke squinted and swore to himself that when his sister would begin, he would definitely buy her a pet. Meanwhile, Lin Ke, along with the instructor, continued his way. As it turned out, Lin Ke passed through some kind of aquarium, and naturally the guy wondered the question is really there, and Lin Ke was not so wrong. Immediately after his thoughts, he noticed a huge eel in the water and was even surprised that this is possible. He realized that although their city is located on the seashore, the temporary storm ruined almost all water inhabitants, and such fish was a rarity. Noticing that the guy was distracted by unnecessary things, and the instructor shouted to stop staring and go faster. After that, Lin Ke was alert and wondered if they were doing some kind of experiment here. After some time, they went to the door, and Zhao Jian knocked on the door, saying that he had brought a new assistant to a certain professor. After permission, two men entered the laboratory, where there was a scientist who carefully examined something in the microscope. Looking at the new assistant, the professor smiled and said that he hopes that this strong young man would last longer. After that, Zhao Jin began to explain to the chief hero what his task is. He said that the guy is here in order to help the professor complete the experiment. Hardly, Lin Ke asked what the essence of the experiment was. Zhao Jian put his hand on the shoulder of the protagonist and told me to worry, because this is just a little experience. and until he helps him, resentment with his family means nothing. The man approached the guy and said that his sister would also be in order. But if he refuses, then there will be certain consequences, once again showing him the image of his sister. The professor went to the operating table and said that he needed to check his condition. After that, Lin Ke was forced to go to this table. Noticing that the guy is not eager to be under the knife of the operation of Zhao Jian, that he was giving 3 seconds and ordered to lie down. The guy swore, but he could not do anything. He noticed that fortunately his mental force is quite pumped, and if they bind him, he can free himself at a critical moment. However, at that moment when the guy tied the main character, he realized how bad he was. Everything looked like he could not move with a muscle. Despite all the efforts of the protagonist, strange shackles that had an image of some skin did not allow him to free himself. At that moment, the professor smiled even wider and said a crazy smile not to worry because these chains are made from the skin of an iron rhino, and even a rank fighter C is not able to destroy them. At that moment, Lin Ke understood how bad he was, as it became obvious after the temporary explosion. Not only people changed, because all animals on land and in water began to mutate, and many had different features. However, regardless of what changed, they became more and more like monsters, and the iron rhino is one of them. Feeling the pleasure of the fear of the protagonist, the professor asked Lin Ke was frightened, and not waiting for his answer to the curtain to meet his former assistant. As it turned out, next to the main character was another man of the part of which were sewn together like some kind of monster. At that moment, Lin Ke realized that he could wait in the future and was very scared. He began to scream with all his might, and asking what kind of goblins something like this happens in the jail camp. Zhao Jun smiled and said that this laboratory of his family is not the one who left the elevator door will never return back again. At that moment, Lin Ke realized that all members of the Jiao family completely lack a conscience, and in his thoughts called them bastards. At that moment, Zhao Chenan entered the laboratory, who, with a manic smile, said that he went against him, and all this ended badly. The guy began to scream and ask what he was going to do with him. Zhao Chenan approached the protagonist close to the face and said that he would not worry because he would not die right away. After that, Bogatiev picked up the device that conducts the current and laughing said that he would now check how the human body conducts electricity. Lin Ke realized that he had aroused the ability of lightning, but he did not know if he was terrible in this case. And in any case, he needed to pretend that he was painful in order to cooperate with them. The professor asked Zhao Chenan what power he wants to apply, after which the guy said to introduce the maximum. After that, without unnecessary words, the shocker was charged to the maximum, and Lin Ke screamed frantically. 15 minutes later, this mockery ended. Zhao Chenan did not understand how the guy survived something like that, especially for such a great time. Lin Ke at that moment was lying on the table trembly, moving away from pain. Zhao Qian scratched his chin and said that Lin Ke is really amazing, because even if he was a fighter of level C, he would not have lasted 5 minutes. Zhao Chenan smiled and decided that it was on the contrary to him well, because in this way they will play with him longer if he quickly died. It would be boring. Risid turned to the professor and said that he could do everything he would only want, and they will bother him later. The professor smiled and said that they may not worry about everything. He would take care of everything. When 2 men left the laboratory, the professor smiled broadly and said that since he has such phenomenal resistance to electricity, he will conduct the most dangerous experiments. Time passed, and the professor continued to engage in his experiments. At that moment, he charged a syringe some strange green liquid. At that moment, Lin Ke woke up who, with a severe expression on his face, asked what he was going to do. The professor was surprised that Lin Ke woke up because he thought he would be in fainting all day. Having prepared the syringe, the man said that he could no longer wait, because this is an incredible drug, and if it is introduced into the body, the consequences will be unpredictable. At that moment, Lin Ke jerked his own hands and feet, and, imperceptibly for the professor, freed himself from the chains. The professor began to be proud of his drug in front of the main character, saying that it was a potion of thunder and lightning. When Lin Ke heard this name, he opened his eyes widely as if he had heard something familiar. At that moment, Lin Ke realized that if he aroused the power of lightning, then he had nothing to fear, and it is possible that this will even help him. Without thinking twice, the professor introduced the drug into the protagonist. He began to laugh and said that if the experiment becomes successful, then he will become famous and save the world. Lin Ke frowned because it was a little painful for him, but he feels the power rushing to his mind, and it seems that the body does not reject it. The very essence of the power of lightning spread through his body. Lin Ke realized his meditation that his mental force was improving. Having concentrated, the guy realized that this strange potion of thunder improves his mental power, and also improved his lightning management skills. Closing his eyes, Lin Ke remembered that those who have special abilities actually control them with the help of the mind, and a capable person changes the air around himself with the help of the mind, converting it into the element. Lin Ke realized that he used his mind for contact with the elements of thunder, which reduced damage to his body. He was well aware that the stronger the power of reason, the stronger the lightning. He also realized that this was a potion of thunder and lightning much better than all the usual drugs of the mind, and if someone can hold out, then he spends an unprecedented power. Suddenly, the guy realized that he had lost one day from his balance. Lin Ke realized that although he used the power of the mind to reduce damage, he beat him within current of 15 minutes, and it was hard enough to withstand. After that, he approached the professor to the main character and asked how he feels. The man came up with a syringe and asked the guy if he was feeling any changes. Lin Ke could not help but notice that despite the fact that the professor and talented, he united with the Jiao family to abduct people and put experiments on them, which was simply not excusable for him. Lin Ke turned away and said that nothing had changed. Without thinking twice, the professor said that this was not surprising because he gave him a concentration of 20%. At the same time, Lin Ke squinted because he realized that the concentration of 20% gives him an increase in mental power only a little more than the usual potion of reason. After that, the professor watched the consumption of days with the protagonist. He realized that the concentration of 20% used only 20 days, and most likely his body is very resistant to the potion of thunder. He realized the full potential of this potion. She increased his power of reason to D3, from which it was not difficult to guess that it was a very powerful potion for him. At that moment, the professor smiled terribly and said that now he would try on him in a concentration of 40%. After that, the man stuck a syringe into the body of the protagonist. The guy's face was covered with cold later since the procedure was much more painful than before. Looking at the number of days, the professor noticed that it decreased by 38. At the same time, the man looked back at his past experimental and could not help but be taken aback. He perfectly understood that he had only 6 experimental, and several of them already in the 4th stage. But he lived to the 5th, so that it was incredibly. After that, the professor showed the notes to the chief hero, speaking how excellent his assistant he is. There were records on the paper about who experienced how much concentration. Lin Ke frowned and began to understand what was happening. Follow the records. He realized that the 6th experimental was at the S1 stage and did not pass the stage of 5. Without thinking twice, the professor took the syringe with a concentration of 60%. But Lin Ke cried out quickly and told him to wait. The guy said that he did not have enough time and he would simply die with this dose. In fact, the guy had many more days. But Zhao Chenan spent all of them with his blows. The professor smiled and told the guy not to worry because he is rich enough to prevent him from dying. Lin Ke looked aside and was very surprised. The man grabbed the protagonist by the hand and began the transfer of days. As it turned out, the professor himself had at its disposal as many as 8,000 days. However, immediately after that, its value decreased by 500 points. As a result, the main character turned out to be only 500 days, and the professor no longer waited for the protagonist and pushed the syringe into the skin. Lin Ke began to experience frantic pain. At the same time, the system congratulated the guy on the fact that his power of reason was increased by 1 level, after which give him another lottery. The professor looked at the quantity that took the potion and noticed that this time he took away 43 days. The man was in excitement and decided to try the potions of the 4th and 5th stage immediately after that without a break. While Lin Ke was hardly restrained by his screams, the system congratulated the guy with an increase in the strength of the mind to the 5th level and gave him 2 more lotteries. At this moment, the professor stopped in order to realize what changes were, but his face was visible cold sweat, and in a sense, he was even frightened because of the protagonist and asked what he felt after the 5th stage. Nevertheless, the guy soullessly said that nothing had changed. The man was in despair because he did not understand how greens did not give him the slightest effect. Naturally, Lin Ke hid the information that thanks to the man his mind power increased from the 2nd to the 5th level. The professor turned away from the protagonist and strongly said that he needed to increase concentration, and it was the whole thing. After that, the professor ran out of the hall with the subjects and said to wait for the main character, because he will now bring a new party. After that, the man slapped the door and left the room. Not wanting to be even more constrained by Lin Qi immediately broke the handcuffs. The guy warmed up and wondered the family of Jiao to be angry if I found out that the guy received such an increase precisely thanks to them. Still sitting on the operating table, Lin Qi vowed that when he arrives, he should definitely take evidence of their crimes with him. Having risen, the guy looked around in the hall and realized that independently the improvement lasts too long, and he needs to rely on the potion and then think how to save his sister. Lin Qi understood that the 5th stage was already having 100% concentration, and he surrendered to whether the professor has more powerful potions. However, Lin Qi reasoned what he felt a sharp pain in his head to do. The guy barely resisted his feet due to a strong dizziness, and thought that because of a sharp jump in the power of reason, he decided to papalize in order to improve the condition. Very soon, Lin Qi again ended up on the operating table in order not to arouse suspicion. He meditated in complete silence, but this helped him get better. Very soon, the 2nd day came, namely the 2nd day of bullying over the main character. The professor, as usual, broke into the laboratory with an extravagant way, shouting to the main character as if to some friend. With a manic smile, the professor approached the main character, holding some kind of cocktail in his hands. After that, he said that he used all precious ingredients in the entire laboratory and all the potions that he could only do in this suitcase. So today everything would work out today. Looking at the number of bottles, Lin Qi realized that this is enough to go to the next level. After that, the professor again began to introduce the protagonist into the body of the protagonist. However, despite all his efforts, the professor was discouraged. He realized that 10 bottles of greens had no effect, and each bottle began to take less and less time, and the latter took the bottle for only 3 days. After that, the guy asked the professor, "Is he really not had 3 more bottles?" The professor looked back at his suitcase and thought a little. He picked up another bottle and decided to try it. He warned the protagonist that the concentration here is twice as much. When Lin Qi heard this, he was covered with cold later because he realized that it was already very dangerous. After he took the medicine, the guy clenched his teeth in pain. But such a test was still possible. The system congratulated the protagonist on the improvement of his strength of reason and said that the protagonist has another lottery. When the professor saw that the guy survived even after a double concentration, he could not help but ask him, was he really a monster? One guy did not answer these questions and look at the bottles. He said that there were 2 more pieces left there. The professor also looked back at the suitcase and thought about it. She explained that the remaining 2 bottles are even more dangerous. He explained that in one of them, 3 times more concentration. After that, he looked at another darker bottle and said that there was a 5-time concentration. Lin Qi looked at the bottles and said that he needed the 3rd bottle, as if he was asking for it. The professor smiled and said that he liked the guy's zeal, after which he took the bottle with a 3-fold concentration. Lin Qi calmly reasoned that judging by the previous dose, this dose should not be deadly for him, after which the professor introduced the medicine into his body. Gradually, the needle of the syringe entered the body of the protagonist, while he thought that when he was finished with the absorption of such a large injection, he would absorb the very last one. However, at that moment, Lin Qi clearly overestimated his strength and shouted loudly in pain. The guy improved his strength to the next 8th level and received another lottery. He realized that, although this is not the maximum power, even so everything happened very painfully. Nevertheless, Lin Qi was ready to endure this pain since his mind power really rises. Lin Qi turned and realized that his body was very hurt, but his mind was clear as ever. He looked in the other direction and decided to look at some details. The guy realized that with his attentiveness, he could even see ants in the corner. After that, the restless professor went to the main character and asked what result he gave a 3-time dose. The guy said that there are still no changes. The man was desperate and said that then they would begin 5 times injection. He said that this is simply the peak of his capabilities, and if this potion does not work, then he will have to stop this experiment. The guy looked at the bottle and realized that there should be a fairly high concentration in it in order to raise his strength at once to the level of D9. Lin Qi realized that this was the pinnacle of what he could achieve, and immediately decided that after he and the Collet, he would break these chains and kill everyone. Suddenly, Jiao Chenan entered the laboratory right before the injection, and the professor greeted him. Smiling at Jiao Chenan asked the man what he was doing. The professor explained to him that he introduced him all his injections up to 3 times, and in the last bottles 5 times, Jiao Chenan was in a sense surprised and asked the guy still has not died. He went to the main character against the first and smiled. The guy said that he was really living and he wanted to beat him with an electric shock several times. And in any case, if he sees how the main character it hurts, his day was already a success. Lin Ke was naturally not happy with such events, and called him a bastard. Zhao Qinan immediately got angry with the protagonist and shouted at him as he dared to say it. He turned and asked him really inexpensive life at all. After that, Zhao Qinan smiled and asked the professor to do him an injection with what he naturally agreed. Without thinking twice, the professor approached the main character and introduced him a 5-time dose. Immediately after the injection, Lin Ke began to scream with all his might, because of the incredible pain that he felt at that moment. He was clearly not ready for her, and did not understand how. With a difference of 5 times, there is such a big pain. Nevertheless, Lin Ke realized that he could not repel this power otherwise. He would just die if he does not use this chance. Then perhaps he would not reach the next level. At that moment, Zhao Qinan laughed as he saw the suffering of the protagonist. Without thinking, he picked up a shocker and told the main character to amuse him another game because he is ready to help him. The professor wanted to stop Zhao Qinan, as he realized how important Lin Ke was for his experiment. But it was too late. Majorly laughing, Zhao Qinan pressed the main thing in shock to the body, because of which he began to scream even louder. Nevertheless, Lin Ke realized that although he experienced unbearable pain, he felt that very soon he could go to a new level. A moment later, Lin Ke heard a message from a system that once again congratulated the guy with an increase in the level and obtaining the lottery. However, the guy did not pay attention to this and instantly destroyed the chains that held him. He raised his fist and said, "Zhao Qinan to die." Immediately after that, the guy with all his might hit his offender on his stomach. According to the fox, the protagonist was visible how long he waited for this, and finally the guy received his revenge. The forces of the blow were so big that Zhao Qinan immediately landed on the opposite wall of the building. Such a blow naturally could not but remain without the consequences, because of which Zhao Qinan immediately began to cough with blood. On his hand, it was clear how the number of days that he had sharply fell to 0, which meant that the guy was already dead. Lin Ke calmly climbed his 2 legs and squeezed his fist of his hand. At that moment, the professor began to laugh feverishly. He was incredibly happy because his experiment was a success. The guy said that even if he does all this time for the Jiao family, he still should get what he deserved. With a clear blow, Lin Ke hit the professor's chest and told him to die. Even in his last seconds, broody blood, the professor rejoiced that he was able to complete his experiment, after which he fell to the floor. Lin Ke began to look around in the laboratory, this time more intently. He realized that this was a secret laboratory without any guard, and no one should see or notice his new abilities. Approaching one of the computers, the guy copied all the information that he only found on the flash drive and took with him. Looking at the flash drive, the guy was well aware that these professors will help prove his guilt, because he simply had to give this flash drive to others. After that, Lin Ke ran out of the laboratory, trying to save his sister. At the same time, in the 9th hospital of the extreme region, not the best atmosphere reigned. All this happened in the ward of the sister of the protagonist. The mercenary cleaned the next apple with his sharp knife, which could not but hesitate the situation. The man went to the customer and told her not to be so afraid and eat an apple. Nevertheless, the girl was outraged and asked how he generally offers something like that after the abduction. The mercenary asked what was still for abduction and who abducted him, because he was ordered only to protect them. The girl did not pay attention to the words of the obvious liar and looked around. She realized that they took her phone, so that it was especially unpleasant because she had to report to the knights what was happening here. Nevertheless, the girl was well aware that they were fighters of the 8th level, and she was not an opponent at all. Suddenly, the girl's phone, who was selected by 2 mercenaries, rang. The mercenary picked up the girl's phone and said with a laugh that her boyfriend calls her. Realizing that they have no idea who the line is, Ke's girl asked if she could answer her. The mercenary said that it is naturally possible, but he will already answer. Immediately after that, the guy shouted to cover his sister, then puzzled everyone in this room. The customer, just like everyone else, stood in a stupor, because even if she wanted to do something, she did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, the guy knocked out the door to the ward and went inside. The mercenaries clearly did not expect such a turn of events and asked who he was at all. However, Lin Ke did not answer this question, and just made a jump forward to the mercenary. Without thinking twice, he hit his enemy. The blow was strong enough to send the first enemy to the wall to the hospital, and he could not get up for some time. The customer was extremely glad to see the protagonist, while the person who cleaned the apples wondered, Is he really the same Lin Ke? Nevertheless, he did not think twice and jumped back to the protagonist with a knife and the words that he should die. Lin Ke simply turned from pressing his opponent. With one sharp movement, he hit the mercenary on his stomach, because of which he immediately began to hark with liters of blood. Very soon, not a living body fell down while Shui looked at the picture in shock. Immediately after that, the guy broke the rope that restrained the girl. Before Sui Wei would come to his senses as Lin Ke turned off his sister from the hospital and laid her on her back, the guy said to move forward since the hospital was no longer the safety that was before. At that moment, Sui Wei realized what was happening and ran out of the ward with the main character. Very soon, the next day came, and although the protagonist was no longer in the camping camp of all other recruits continued. That evening, as their other evenings, a group of recruits gathered, and Zhao Jian in front of them announced that today's training would check how they learn new skills. However, the man did not have time to start his training as some messages began to enter his phone, which he put on the nearest bench. Realizing that this is something important, man raised his phone where he heard him who was informed that Lin Ke escaped and killed everyone in the laboratory. Zhao Jian, when he heard this information, was very surprised and wondered if the informant was sure of what the man assured him because both his subordinates were injured. Zhao Jian opened his eyes widely because he realized that things were bad. Without thinking twice, the man went back to the underground laboratory in order to visit what happened. Very soon, Zhao Jian heard some strange roar and was even a little scared. In the middle of the room was Zhao Chenan, who stood on his feet, and despite the fact that he was trembling with his whole body, he still looked like a normal person who just growls for an unknown reason. Thinking that it was his brother, Zhao Jian put his hand on his jacket and asked him what happened. And really that guy, Lin Ke, ran away. However, despite the fact that Zhao Jian asked a question, no answer. At this moment, Zhao Jian began to notice strange differences from his brother, such as, for example, a more purple skin, as well as an incomprehensible roar that has lasted a long time. At that moment, Zhao Chenan wrapped his head. Zhao Jian finally realized that it was not his brother at all, but a temporary monster who smiled terribly, looking at him. Zhao Jian could not believe that his ex-brother turned into a temporary monster and stumbled back, not knowing what to do. However, the man was not given a break, and very soon a former professor, or what was left of his body, attacked Zhao Jian from his back. The man clearly did not expect something like that and opened his eyes wide. With one sharp blow, he pushed the professor away from him and knocked out a temporary stone from the monster. Nevertheless, the temporary stone was too fragile and immediately crashed as soon as it was extracted from the body of a zombie. However, this was all over, and Zhao Jian heard a more loud scream behind his back and turned back. He turned out just in time to fight back, a temporary monster that managed to creep to him from the back. Nevertheless, it was still very difficult for the examiner since recently this person was his relative. However, Zhao Jian found the strength to hit the monster and thus send him into a flight to another part of the room. Not finishing his enemy, the man ran out of the laboratory, leaving the zombie alone. Zhao Jian was very tense, and this was visible in his gait because he sought to achieve his goal as quickly as possible. Very soon he ran to the elevator and began to go back up. Nevertheless, the zombie continued to run to Zhao Jian while he frantically closed the door. Very soon, the door of an expensive elevator closed, and Zhao Jian cursed. He said that no one should find out about it. Very soon, the sunset to the city fell. The door to one specific building was closed, but the main character had no choice but to stay there. He shouted to the girl that for today they will stop here because there were no people there. Shui turned and told the main character that if they stop now, then those brothers Jiao will be unpunished. Lin Ke, without hesitation, jumped onto the fence and said not to worry about this girl, as well as to rush. Very soon, Lin Ke and the customer were behind the hedge. After that, Lin Ke, along with the girl, began to go to this abandoned building, hoping to find at least one suitable room there. In a sense, the main character was really lucky because both the corridors and the rooms were in a fairly decent state, which did not correspond to the broken windows outside. Lin Ke put his sister by the bed and said that, although this is the extreme region, there should not be a zombie. After that, Sui Wei asked the protagonist what to do next. The guy thought because he understood that, although the family Jiao and powerful, he revealed their secrets, so they must look for him now. The guy went to the door and said that at first he would find something for her and sister, after which he would deal with his family. Shui did not stop the protagonist and simply told him to return soon. Lin Ke closed the door because he understood that now he could not believe anyone except her. After that, the door finally slammed shut and Lin Ke went about his business. The first cue, Lin Ke opened a system store in order to see what he can do now. The system displayed the characteristics of the protagonist, as well as his special skills. The guy once again looked at his characteristics and distributed new abilities, and also improve everything that he could. And now the fighters will not be able to do anything below the level with him. The guy realized that he could not go to the hospital now, and he had only one choice: Uncle Jiang. The guy remembered that when he was an ordinary knight, he could not avoid injuries, but the hospital was too expensive, so he was treated with him. Very soon, the guy reached some kind of nondescript kiosk where only his name was from the remarkable, the old doctor. Lin Ke calmly went into the hospital and found a conversation with another patient there. The girl asked the doctor that with his analyses to what his uncle said that everything was in order, and she was just tired, so her heartfelt rhythm is unregulated, and she feels bad. Very soon, the girl left the room. Then the man asked the protagonist whether he could help him with something. At that moment, Lin Ke took off his mask and said that it was he. Only at that moment, the uncle remembered the protagonist and immediately rose from the chair. Lin Ke said that he had everything in the same way, and the man said that it seems that he is hard for him to live. After that, Lin Ke said that he should buy a little glucose. Uncle asked whether Lin Ke is leaving the city now, and said that he was better not to do this now, because he heard a large group of zombies wandering outside. Lin Ke said that there is nothing like that, and this is just for his sick friend who is inconvenient to go to the hospital. Uncle Jiang exhaled and said that it was good, because if something happens to him, his sister would begin to worry. It was obvious that the man clearly did not know about the state of the sister of the protagonist. After some time, the man took out a bag with a bunch of glucose bags, as well as tubes, and asked the protagonist to take it. Lin Ke was surprised and asked why he gives something like that for free, and it can cost a whole day. The man asked if the guy knew that his clinic would close soon. When Lin Ke heard about this, he was very surprised and asked what was happening. The man explained that at present the prices for medicines are so expensive that people simply cannot afford it. Lin Ke realized that in this way, all the resources would go into the hands of the owners of those hospitals that cannot be good. Lin Ke squinted, thinking about how he could help a man because he had repeatedly helped him out in the past. Suddenly, Lin Ke grabbed the doctor's hand until he understood what was happening. After that, the guy transferred a small number of days to the doctor's account. The man could not believe that the guy did this and was speechless. Lin Ke said that if he has problems, then he could contact him anytime, after which the doctor thanked him. Suddenly, a man broke into the hospital and asked the man to meet if he was suspicious here. The protagonist was unsuccessful, and he immediately put on his mask. The doctor did not understand what was happening and asked for suspicious. The man came closer and said that some people buy glucose syringes and so on. At this moment, the doctor looked at the package which recently gave the main character. The man said that if he notes someone like that, he must immediately inform him, otherwise he will cease to supply him with the goods. Trying not to give out the fact that this definition is one of the people in the room, the man said that he understood everything. However, at that moment, the stranger drew attention to the protagonist here. He quickly went to him and asked why it was all these medicines for him. Lin Ke immediately realized that this person was a jam of the Jiang family, and the guy simply could not substitute his uncle, because of which he began to run. Without thinking twice, the guy began to escape from the hospital because of all his might. The man did not even immediately react, and turned only when Lin Ke was already running out of the room. The man immediately picked up his phone and told his comrades that Lin Ke is next to him, and they should hurry. The main character ran out into the lane. He thought scared that all this is very bad for Uncle Jiang. The pursuers ran out into the street. One of them shouted that Lin should not have gone far. The protagonist fled at full speed along the lane. He decided that he could not fix it and will figure it out later. Lin quickly ran and saw how someone suddenly appeared on his side. The guy saw a photograph of the protagonist in the system window. He called him in dismay by name. The opponent rushed at the protagonist and shouted that he dared to kill the citizens of their glorious city. Lin held out his hand forward and grabbed his opponent's hand. He threw the guy through himself. The main character told himself that he does not need to quarrel now, but he needs to run. The opponent held the phone in his hand. He shouted to the main character that he would not run away. Lin ran into the lane and hid behind the wall. He scaredly thought that the pursuer should not catch up with him. Suddenly, someone from the side called the protagonist. He scaredly wrapped his head to the side. Several strangers came up to the head hero. One of them viciously said that they would attack the three of them on one. Lin looked displeased on the side at the attacker and said that he would not be confident. The main character swung his bag and began to scatter with powerful blows of rivals on the sides. Lin stood with a bag in his hand. He told the beaten hooligans that the Jiao family should leave the city. One of the bandits, lying on the ground, shouted to his friends that the guy was leaving the city. Lin could not understand why the attackers decided that he was leaving. Lin thought that he could not get out of the city until his sister woke up. The main character made his way through the deserted streets. The main character went into the apartment. The girl with excitement asked the guy what he did because of what the whole city was talking about him. Lin told a frightened partner that the Jiao family was killing children. The protagonist told the girl that the family organized an underground laboratory in a jail camp. They conducted experiments in public. He himself almost became their victim. The protagonist told his partner that during the escape he killed Zhao Chen and Professor. The girl explained to the guy that after the murder of a member of the Jiao family, he began to look for a whole city. She offered him to move to Minmen. The protagonist explained to his partner that his sister had not yet woken up. For him, all this will be very dangerous. The pursuers decided that he would leave. Therefore, for him, it will be safe here so far. The girl with excitement asked the guy what would he do now. Lin calmly replied that she did not need to be afraid while he had information. The guy looked carefully at his hand. He saw that he had less time. Lin sat on the sofa. He thought that the Jiao family is in the inner region. His personal time will not even be enough to go out into the external area. The guy took the phone in his hands and looked carefully at him. He thought that the knights in the Jiao family are in conspiracy. He decided to stop thinking about it. A system window appeared in front of the guy. He decided to himself that he should be able to fight Zhao Jiun. The main character took the phone in his hands and realized that Zhao called him. He decided that his partner would not be able to calculate his location. Zhao on the phone strictly demanded from the protagonist to give him everything that he took. Lin demanded from his partner to pay him for the flash drive for 3,000 days. He also demanded a temporary card for himself. A temporary card made it possible to keep time on it. Zhao asked the protagonist, "Does he really want to bargain?" The girl went behind the guy and asked with fright, "Did he really want to give a Zhao evidence?" The main character looked at his partner and explained that he just needed to take revenge on Zhao. The main character arrived at the meeting at the scrap metal factory. Around it was deserted. Lin, looking at the phone, he knew this place well, since there was a suitable place to meet. The guy read the message on the phone. He realized that Zhao is at a level of 3 and could lay it in one movement of the finger. The main character sent a message by phone. After half an hour, he was supposed to come to the scrap metal factory. At the appointed time, and the place came the car. The guy got out of the car and looked around. He realized that Zhao had come to the meeting alone. Zhao stood with a bandage on the eye and held the phone in his hands. He received a message. Zhao headed for the main character with a very slow and unhurried step. The fighter strictly asked the protagonist, "Where is he needed the thing?" Lin asked his partner, "Where is what is needed for him?" Zhao threw several electronic cards from his partner's hand. Lin carefully examined the cards. He had the opportunity to enter not only in the external, but also in the inner region. The main character demanded from the fighter to cancel the hunt for him. Zhao answered the guy that he could not cancel the hunt. Lin slyly asked the fighter, "How does it know that he has no copies?" Zhao thought very deeply. He did not answer the main character. After a small pause, the fighter called and ordered to cancel the search for the protagonist. Zhao turned off the phone. He turned around and told the guy that he was ready. Lin swung and abruptly threw something in the direction of his opponent. The man held out his hand and joyfully caught a small object flying on him. Zhao looked closely and noticed how a small and smoke bomb lay in his hands. Suddenly, there was a very bright and strong explosion. The flame flashed brightly. In front of the warrior, there were large puffs of smoke. Zhao shouted angrily after the main character that he could not leave. Zhao stood and looked displeased at huge dust clubs in front of him. The main character ran up from the side and swung his hand. He shouted angrily that he was not going to run away. The fighter swung his foot and shouted to the opponent that he did not understand the difference between levels with 3 and D9 at all. The protagonist angrily asked the warrior if he was sure. After that, he knocked him in a grand scale. Zhao did not have time to defend himself from a powerful blow from the opponent and flew far to the side. After a powerful blow, the fighter turned over in the air and fell to the ground. Lin pointed a strictly finger at the instructor and said that he taught him the first lesson. Zhao threw the jacket aside. He shouted to the main character that he would show him his place. The instructor rushed forward to attack. A huge demonic tiger appeared above him. Lin stood in a combat rack. He thought that the fighter of the level D9 would not just react to such an attack. The protagonist, very fast and dexterous movements, dodged the opponent's attacks. Zhao got angry and surprised. He did not understand how the guy could guess his attacks. Lin deftly dodged the opponent's blows. He asked the instructor if he really began to doubt himself. The main character sharply bounced back. He shouted fun to the instructor that he knew this abandoned city very well. He lives here for a long time. Jiao was very angry. He looked at the guy with great hatred. The instructor at full speed rushed forward at the opponent and shouted that he would kill him. The protagonist began to back and began to retreat to defend himself. Jiao rushed to him at full speed. The main character retreated back and carefully looked in front of him. Jiao quickly fled forward and did not notice how he stumbled against a large white ribbon. The instructor was very scared. He realized that his legs were connected and he could not move. The instructor fell to the ground and could not move. His legs were connected by white ribbon. The main character with a smile joyfully told the opponent that he did not expect that such tricks would work on him. Jiao held out his hand back and grabbed the gun to attack the protagonist. The instructor aimed from a pistol on a guy and shouted that he would die. The main character sharply swung his foot and knocked out a gun from the hands of the instructor. Lin, with a quick movement, grabbed the instructor's gun into his hands. The main character directed the gun to the instructor. He told the fighter that his level was 3, but he had never been outside the city and did not kill temporary zombies. Lin held a man on the sight of a pistol. He told him that he had almost no survival experience. The main character held a gun in front of him. He strictly reminded the opponent that in close combat, a knife is much more effective. Jiao looked at the guy and viciously asked, did he really want to kill him? Lin looked strictly at the opponent and said that he should die for the death of all the experimental in their experiments. A huge burning knife appeared from the hand of the protagonist. He viciously shouted to the instructor that he would go to hell. Lin swung and pierced the instructor's body with his blade with a powerful blow. Jiao lay on the ground, unconscious in a pool of blood. Nearby stood the main character. The guy looked at the hands of the deceased. He studied the time indicator and decided to take it to himself. The main character looked down carefully and noticed that something lay near his legs. Lin looked at the ground in front of him and saw that the keys to the car were lying there. The protagonist took the keys and decided to open the car to look at what's inside. Lin opened the doors in the car and noticed that there was nothing on the rear chair. The guy carefully examined the insides of the car. He opened the trunk. The main character got into the car behind the wheel. He carefully studied the onboard computer. The guy noticed that one destination in the external zone was introduced on Jiao's computer. The guy got out of the car and stopped behind the trunk. The protagonist remembered that the car that shot down his sister was with a license plate from the inner zone. The guy carefully studied the license plate. On it was the letter C. In such a car, it was possible to calmly cross the zone. Lin realized that there was nothing interesting in the car. He decided to go to the instructor's house. The car was approaching the checkpoint. There was nobody at the post, but any offender would surround in a few minutes. The main character was very calm in a car through a checkpoint. Lin sat behind the wheel of a car, and after a block floor, he decided to immediately go to Jiao's house. The main character drove up to the gates of the estate. They opened to run it inside. Lin stood near a large, chic building. He got out of the car and looked around. The main character went to the house. He thought that Jiao Jian still did not leave the city, but he could be armed. In one of the private offices in the internal zone, the subordinate came to the head of the Jiao family named Chong. The man sat at the table and smoked a cigar. Boss Chong with a cigar asked the guy if there was news about Jian. Jiao calmly told the man that he called, but no one answered him. The boss answered the subordinate that Jian is over and can be considered losses. The man asked the guy if he asked someone to pick up the guy. The subordinate answered the boss that the second brother had already sent someone for the right person. The man was very angry. He knocked on the table with his hand in a grand scale. The boss ordered the subordinate so that Jian cut the guy into pieces and threw the dogs. The protagonist opened the door to the house of Jiao Jian. Inside was completely empty. The guy slowly ascended the house and carefully looked around. Around there was an expensive interior. The main character looked around and saw a lot of expensive weapons for tens of thousands of days. Lin saw a huge genetic module inside the house. Using such equipment, it was possible to effectively absorb genetic drugs. It cost 3,000 days. The guy carefully looked closely and saw a large supply of genetic potions. The main character climbed into the genetic module and connected himself to him. He had very little to the level of S. The genetic capsule increases not only human vitality, such a capsule also strongly strengthens the body and breaks the flesh. Then she restores this flesh. In the case of a breakthrough from level D, 9 to 1 degree of pain is unimaginable. An ordinary person can even lose consciousness. The main character woke up sharply and carefully looked in front of him with a piercing look. The system informed the owner that it increased to the level of 1. The guy earned a profitable lottery. The system informed the owner that when he overcomes the letter border of the level, he receives a chance to win in the lottery. Lin joyfully thought to himself that he could now win objects of level with, or even in. The guy felt that he had a headache. The main character came out of the apparatus and looked at his new body. It improved very much. The guy figured out that if he met again with Jiao, then he would instantly defeat him with his mental force. A system window appeared in front of the main character. He decided to check if there is luck on his side. The protagonist acquired for himself a cloak invisible. This clothing had the first level of protection. With the help of the energy of the carrier, it was possible to turn the light. The protagonist, with great interest and admiration, looked in front of him invisible. Lin put on a magic cloak. He noticed that this clothes consumed a lot of energy from him. The guy carefully examined his clothes. He decided that such good things must first be removed to avoid damage. The main character walked around the house and decided to see what was there in the boxes near the wall. The guy sat down near the nightstand and opened it. He carefully looked inside. The protagonist studied the time cards in his hands with great attention. Lin walked around the room and carefully looked at things on the nightstand. The guy suddenly noticed some interesting photo on top of the nightstand. Lin carefully studied the photo of the Jiao brothers in the frame. They stood near a large car. The main character carefully looked at the car number in the photo. He seemed familiar to him. Lin carefully studied the photo. He realized that it was that car that shot down his sister. The main character continued to look at the photo. He realized that his sister was killed by the young heir to the Jiao family named Jianbai. At this time, there was a knock on the front door. The main character sharply and with excitement turned around. Near the door stood an unfamiliar guy. Behind him on the street stood a large truck. Lin went to the intercom. He decided that time was very later for the delivery of goods. He decided to pretend to be the owner of the house. The main character noticed that the deliverer looked very excited. Lin ordered the stranger through the intercom so that he left the parcel and leave. The deliverer answered the partner that he would do so. The stranger turned and began to go aside. The main character was surprised to notice that for some reason, the truck did not leave. The main character neatly and quietly opened the door and looked out. He decided to approach the car. Lin opened the car body behind. He noticed a large metal cage inside. The protagonist carefully looked deep into the car body. Frightened, Lin noticed how some monster rushed at him from the cage. The main character sharply bounced back from the car body. He realized that the monster in the cage was Jiao Chenan. Lin looked at the mutant in a cage in a car. He told himself that the Jiao family really cares about their reputation. They delivered their son from the laboratory. The mutant held out his hand from the cage and wanted to grab the guy. According to the law of the city, all temporary zombies fell under the order of those who found them. If the zombie was a danger, then it was destroyed. The main character took the phone in his hands. He thought that the dead zombie could help him and overthrow the Jiao family. Lin began to take photographs of a cage and a monster on his phone. He thought that such photos would definitely hurt the reputation of the Jiao family. Lin looked the phone. He thought that if such a video is spreading, then the Jiao family would pay for the deed. The main character approached the cage and looked at the monster. He realized that if the zombie died not by a natural death, then he did not have much time. The maximum was at the level of D9. The main character held out his hand forward and pressed the button. The cage began to rise up. The monster abruptly escaped from the cage and rushed forward to a man. Lin sharply jumped up and with all his might hit the monster's knee in flight. The protagonist, with a sharp blow of his hand, along with the blade, pierced the attacked mutant. Lin squeezed his hand into a fist. He stood next to him. On the ground lay the body of a murdered monster. The main character looked at the rest of his time. He joyfully told himself that he will soon be able to raise the power of the mind with one. The guy decided to return to the house. He slowly headed for the front door. A few minutes later, many cars drove up to the house and people ran into from them. The guy got out of the car and told his subordinates to wait for him from the outside. The fighters became unlikely to shouted to the boss that they would do everything. The leader went to the exit of the house. The main character stood his back in the room. The boss went and looked at him with surprise at him. The guest took the protagonist for the owner of the house. He bowed and said that he needed to take his brother home. Lin turned to the side. He realized that they came to him from the Jiao family. The guest realized that in front of him is the main character. He angrily asked the guy, "What did he do here?" The guest inside the house asked the protagonist with displeasure, "Where's the second young gentleman?" Lin turned around and looked at the stranger. He examined him and realized that the level of the fighter is with one. The main character understood with the excitement that he now needs to go into a near battle. Some fighters can fight at distant distances, but they become weak if the distance with the opponent is reduced. An experienced fighter will never allow him to get closer to himself. The main character shouted unexpectedly to the opponent that Zhao Jian was located behind him. The warrior was very surprised. He wrapped his head with great interest and looked back. The main character sharply jumped on the spot and swung his fist. He shouted that even workers are useless in the Jiao family. The opponent carefully looked at the protagonist. Lin took out the blade from his hand and prepared to attack. The stranger saw how the main character, after a strong scope, handed his fist to him. The fighter looked angrily and told the main character that he was very weak. The stranger slapped with both hands and activated the flame. A bright glow appeared around him. Lin bounced off the opponent to a safe distance. The rival shouted that he used the technique of the elements of fire. The fighter stood and folded his hands. Some fighters of the elements of fire can create a fire ring near themselves to drive away the opponent. Such a skill cannot be used continuously. The main character looked carefully in front of him. He remembered that he had recently reached a level with one and could kill an opponent. The fighter launched fireballs against the protagonist. He shouted that Lin could try again. Lin sat down to the ground and rested his hand in it. He realized that the opponent, with the help of a shot, blocked the retreat path for him. The main character realized that he needed to hurry. He broke off and ran forward. Lin put his hand in front of him and stopped the fireball flying at him. The protagonist looked in front of him scared. He still saw a huge burning ball. Lin extended his hands forward and grabbed a huge piece of fire on them. The main character shouted so that the fireball turned into ashes. Lin looked in front of him and with excitement thought that the speed of the attack of his opponent was slow. Lin stood and looked in fright as a large fireball hung right in front of him. There was a very bright red explosion. The main character quickly bounced back. A contented fighter looked at the protagonist. He carefully studied him with his eyes. The protagonist looked in front of him scared. He did not expect the fire would be so strong. Linya had a lot of experience in battles with modern zombies, but he first met with the owner of the elements and with a warfare from one. The guest spread his hands to the side and asked the protagonist to tell him where the second young gentleman is. Lin shouted to his opponent that he had already done a lot of noise, he had no other choice. The main character held out the gun forward and began to shoot from him at the opponent. The fighter very cleverly dodged to the side. The opponent viciously explained to the main character that it was useless to use a gun against him. Lin carefully looked at the weapon in his hands. He told the opponent that he knew about it. The fighter was very angry. He asked the guy with displeasure, what did he say about? A fire alarm turned on in the room and water poured from the ceiling. Lin explained to the opponent that he was not aiming at him. The fighter spread the fire near his feet. He shouted that he would evaporate all the droplets. Lin explained to the surprised opponent that thanks to the droplets he will be able to defeat him. The main character activated an improved ability called Thunder Snakes. A large green snake appeared above it. Lin stood and looked piercingly in front of him. His opponent was scared. The fighter looked in front of him in surprise and asked what he sees it. Lin swung on top and hit his hand on a puddle with water. Drops scattered around. The main character sat down to the floor and a very bright explosion appeared around him. The lightning sparkled. The stranger looked at the big green demonic snake. He scaredly asked the protagonist, how could he have an element at the same time? The demonic snakes very quickly rushed forward to the man to attack. The fighter did not have time to defend himself from the attack of the snake, and his body was very much injured. The fighters on the street were surprised when they saw fire on top of the building. They did not understand what happened. The main character stood inside the building. A bright flame raged around. A group of fighters burst into the room. The protagonist carefully looked at the opponent's lying body. There was a group of other fighters around. Lin noticed how one of the soldiers unfastened the belt on his belt. He realized that the fighters have power belts to increase strength. A group of fighters opened fire on the main character. The boss shouted that it was necessary to kill Linya K. The main character began to jump very sharply and quickly to evade the shots. Lin realized that rivals should not reveal that he has an element of lightning. The main character sharply ran forward. He realized that none of his rivals should survive. A flame raged over the building. The fire continued to flare up more and more. Lin stood in the building, and the bodies of the fighters were lying around him on the ground. He realized that he needed to leave as soon as possible. Suddenly, siren signals were heard. Lin understood with the excitement that the police arrived very quickly. The main character quickly jumped out of the burning building and ran very quickly to the side. The building was embraced by a fire. There were cars and many people around. The main character nominated for the bushes. He realized that there were many people with a strong weapon near the building. Lin decided to hide and fled. The main character in the city stood lonely on the roof of the building near the door. Lin carefully looked closely and saw a system window with various goods in front of him. The main character saw a medicine in the system window. He pressed a button to buy it. Lin drank the medicine, he thought, and decided to himself that he would force Jiao Jiangbi for everything. The guy went into the building and went to the door. He realized that he needed to destroy the Jiao family. Otherwise, everything would be harder for him with the new arrest order. The main character thought and realized that with the Jiao family you need to be more accurate. Otherwise, he would not only not cure his sister, but would also substitute himself. Lin carefully read a news message on the phone. He learned that the Jiao family bought Minyan. The guy thoughtfully thought that the Jiao family earned money on people's troubles. Lin held the phone in his hands. He realized that it would be difficult for him to defeat this family. The main character went down the building down the stairs. He needed to return and come up with a plan. The guy went to the door of his apartment and prepared to open it. Lin thought that the girl is very reliable and does not walk, and does not run the streets. The girl inside the apartment greeted the protagonist. Lin waved her hand. The guy asked his girlfriend, wasn't she resting? The partner scaredly answered the guy that she could not fall asleep. The girl showed the main character a message on the phone. In the news there was information about the fire in the house of Zhao Jiyun. At the scene, many human bodies were found. Lin scaredly asked the girl, did she really decide that he did all this? He thought the guy to himself that after a fire in Zhao's house no one would know about his lightning power. A girlfriend with excitement told the main character that Zhao Jun is the second son of a very influential Jiao family. The main character asked the girl, did she really decide that he was capable of this? A girlfriend took the phone in her hands and told the guy that he was very strong. Lin waved his hand and said she would go to rest. He himself decided to check his sister's condition. The girlfriend reached out and told the guy that she was going to sleep. The girl went out into the next room and slammed the door behind her. The main character was left alone. Lin came up and noticed how his sister was lying on a hospital bed. The patient was in a coma and needed only glucose. The main character grabbed his sister's hand with his hand. He pumped her a little of his time. Lin looked at the patient and thought to himself that he would soon find the one who did this to her. The guy promised to avenge the girl. The next morning, the girl woke up in her room and left the door. The girl looked aside and was surprised to notice how the guy stood in front of her and held a bag of food. The girlfriend rushed to the package of food and began to consume it with appetite. She asked the guy if he was afraid to come across the Knights of Fame during the day. Lin, in a calm voice, explained to his girlfriend that the warrant was taken off his arrest. The partner, in amazement, asked the guy, can they stay here now? The main character strictly explained to the girl that he needed to get into the inner region now. A girlfriend shouted displeasedly to the guy that he himself wants to go to the inner area to eat fragrant food there. She herself will remain here with bread and noodles. The protagonist, in a serious voice, explained to his partner that he was not going to have fun here. He wanted to take revenge on his sister. A girlfriend in amazement explained to her friend that revenge is very dangerous. The main character grabbed his partner by the hand and explained that he had a plan. Lin held a surprised girl by the hand and gave her a little of his time. The girlfriend, in dismay, reminded the guy that he promised that he would return her home. Lin turned away and waved his hand. He promised that nothing would happen to him. The guy went outside and put on a mask. He realized that if the Jiao family finds out that he is alive, then he will have many problems. The main character walked along the street. He heard two passers-by warmly discuss that a gentleman named Jiao died and his house was completely burned down. Lin thought to himself that Zhao Jun's heart was damaged. Therefore, he cannot turn into zombies. The protagonist thought that the Jiao car could not be tracked after the theft. He turned on a special mode there. The guy slowly approached the border of the outer zone. He stopped near the wall. The protagonist saw an announcement of his wanted list. For his capture, they gave 100 days as a reward. Lin decided that he needed to use old methods. The main character approached a large grid and looked forward through it. Lin knew that in order to enter the inner region, it was necessary to have 3,000 days with him. Management of internal areas is much stricter than in external districts. Therefore, in the internal areas, there is a very low crime rate. The main character dragged on his place sharply to jump over a high fence. Lin jumped over the fence and landed to the ground. He thought to himself that the restriction was not originally adapted for fighters with one. The main character accelerated and ran down the street. At the last moment, he thought that if he has a level with one, then he did not need to have his own 3,000 days. The guy carefully looked around on the streets of the inner region. Cars drove along the roads. Everything looked quiet and calm. Lin thought to himself that the inner region was flourishing. The guy was already in this place several times, and each time he could not get rid of such a feeling. The main character took the phone and carefully looked at his future route. Lin went to the entrance to the large 5-star Senton hotel. The main character approached the hotel to the registration stance and ordered himself a room on the north side. Lin walked along the hotel corridor. To live here for 1 day, it would take 20 days. He was ready for this, for revenge. The guy went to his room and opened the door. He turned on electricity. The main character stood near the large window. He prepared to push the curtains and look out. Lin spread the curtains and carefully looked through the hotel window on the street. The guy saw outside the window a luxurious and rich mansion of the Jiao family. The main character was surprised to notice that the mansion was very strictly guarded. Armed people were everywhere. Lin took and looked through the binoculars at the mansion. He realized that all the guards have a level. The main character held binoculars in his hands. He realized that for revenge, he would need to at least have both types of forces at a level with one. The main character stood near the window and carefully recorded something on the sheet. Lin is completely absorbed in the process of recording information. He carefully watched who entered and went into the Jiao mansion. He made a detailed schedule. Lin looked at the graph on the leaflet. He noted to himself that there were few guards during the day, but they were very striking. The head of the family named Jiao Zheng is returning from work at night. The guy turned inside the hotel room. He remembered the flash drive from the laboratory. The main character extended his hand to the flash drive on the table. It contained evidence of illegal experiments of the Jiao family. The guy, delighted to himself, thought that for his sister, he was going to take revenge on his own. The main character rang the phone. He looked and noticed that it was an unknown number. He received a message about information about the Jiao family. The guy carefully read that the Jiao estate is intensively guarded by militants from the Wu family with the level of P. The main character held the phone in his hands. He thought that a family from the inner region could control most of the pharmaceutical industry in Zhuanqin. The family of WU Central District is one of the 2 main families who built the city. The main character realized that he should necessarily avenge his sister, even if the Jiao family relies on the Wu family. The protagonist in the hotel room stepped aside to the bed. Lin sat in meditative benefit. He closed his eyes and a bright, fiery radiance appeared around him. The guy was in very deep meditation. He heard a clock ticking on the wall. The main character sat with his eyes closed and breathed deeply. There was fire next to him. Suddenly, Lin opened his eyes very sharply and looked in front of him. He realized that he had reached the level with one. The guy got out of bed. He realized that the transition from level D9 to level from 1 is very difficult. A lot of people stuck in this place. The main character looked at his hand at the rest of the time. He realized that the breakthrough gives a great jump in force. Lin stood in the center of the hotel room and waved his hands in all directions. The main character swung forward with a fist. He did not even expect such power. He didn't even have to drink a genetic potion. The system told the owner that his strength was increased to the level of 1. He even received 1 profitable lottery. Lin carefully looked into the system window. Each time he overcame the letter level, he received a chance to win in a profitable lottery. The prize was not limited to its letter level. The guy thought joyfully to himself that the invisible cloak for him was useful. Such a cloak had the first level of protection. The owner became invisible. The main character threw magic clothes on top. He decided to check how the cloak would help him. Lin looked joyfully at his body. The cloak made him invisible. The guy got the opportunity to run not only from the Jiao family, but also from temporary zombies. The main character squeezed his hand into a fist and said that the cloak consumes a lot of energy from him. Lin thought to himself that with such a cloak and his physical strength, he could defeat the Jiao family. After revenge, he will need to somehow get out of the mansion. The protagonist was sitting on the bed in a meditative pose. He needed to raise his strength to the level with 1, and using a flash drive to lure the heads of the Jiao family. Then he had to take revenge. Lin used the meditation of the starry sky. Near his body were clouds of various energy. The next day, the protagonist had a call from the system. Lin looked at the system window. His strength was increased to the level of 1, and he received 1 profitable lottery. The main character read congratulations from the system. He received a Thunderbone skill. The Thunderbone skill consumed a large amount of mental force. The power of lightning can be collected and gained into the body of the owner. Lin activated a new skill in his body. A bright blue lightning appeared in front of him. The guy joyfully looked around. He told himself that such a technique not only improves the body, the main character felt that perception in his body was better. He saw insects in the corner of the room. Lin looked through the wall of the room and noticed that a waiter was walking along the corridor there. The main character looked into the room and noticed that in the next room someone was sleeping on the bed. Lin looked at the system window. He thought that with the help of this technique, all his techniques reached the level of C. He got the opportunity to win even a fighter with a level of 4. The protagonist was surprised to notice in the system that the lightning rod cost 3,000 days. Lin thought and calculated to himself that if he advanced the skill to the 3rd stage, then it would be even more useful for him. The main character looked from the hotel window at the mansion. He realized that with a lightning rod, his chances of success would be higher. Lin looked aside. He remembered that he had trained all day and did not feel fatigue. He had a lot of strength. The main character carefully looked at the mansion from above. He knew that the head of the Jiao family leads a measured life and rarely leaves the house. There were very few opportunities for Lin. Lin looked from the window to the street. He thought joyfully that he had ideas. The main character began to type text on the phone. He wrote a message. The main character finished writing and sent an anonymous email. 50 minutes later, Lin noticed through the window as a car drove away from an expensive mansion to the side. The guy carefully looked out the street through the binoculars. He said that the head of Jiao Chun hastily left. The main character held binoculars in his hands. He thought that the main problem for him is that the family Wu family helps the Jiao family. Lin looked out the street for a traveling car. He said to himself that Zhao Jianbai must pay his sister for the blood. At night, at the gates of the Zhao family estate, there were 2 guards. There was silence around. The fighter took out a cigarette. He told his colleague that the Jiao family guarded 30 people. Mages of the earth also helped them. The fighter turned around and with excitement told a colleague that people with the abilities of the earth could hear other people's steps at a great distance. The guard lit a cigarette. He explained to his colleague that people with his abilities were listening to him while he walks on the ground. The fighter handed the cigarettes to the main character and offered to smoke. The guy scaredly replied that smoking for him is expensive and all this is taking away time. Therefore, he threw it for a long time. The guard exhaled cigarette smoke. At this time, some kind of noise was heard from the side. The guy near the gate turned around in fright. The fighter hugged his friend and said that this noise was published by a cat. Usually nothing happens to the night shift. The invisible main character approached the gate and jumped through them. The main character very quickly and gently jumped over the wall and quietly landed. Lin, in an invisible cloak, very slowly and neatly walked along the territory of the estate. The main character recalled that the Jiao family captured almost all important medical facilities in the city. They also captured Uncle Zhang's hospital and the place where his sister was treated. The guy slowly walked along the path towards the building. He understood that all this was huge amounts of money. In the botanical garden, the guard smoked a cigarette. He heard some noise on the side. The guard angrily looked aside and said that the rat itself came to its trap. The fighter suddenly turned sharply and ran aside with all his strength. He looked around the corner of the house and thought that he would catch the rat. The fighter sharply jumped out of the corner and noticed that there was nobody in front of him. The guard told himself in a frightened voice that he felt a movement here. He decided that he was mistaken. The fighter heard some rustle on the side. He turned carefully. The guard scaredly looked aside and noticed how the guy's body lay on the ground. The guard looked at the trail on his colleague's back. He realized that his fighter was struck by an opponent with a level of 1. The guard was sitting on the lawn near the body of his colleague. He heard a suspicious noise behind. The frightened fighter heard a loud clatter behind him. The guy frightenedly turned back and could not understand what was happening there. The protagonist sharply jumped up and with all his might hit the guard in the flight with his foot. Lin looked at the beaten guard. He thought that earthly abilities give the fighter an incredible sensitivity to his movement. The frightened fighter was lying in the corner of the lawn. The main character noticed that the guard could not do anything against him. The protagonist was surprised to notice how his opponent began to recover and get to his feet. The guard went into his senses and shouted to the main character that he quickly reacted. The fighter concentrated and a fiery glow appeared around his arms. The guard with all his might hit the ground with a powerful blow. He used an improved level of D. A large crack appeared on the ground after the blow. After a very powerful explosion on the ground, the main character jumped high up. Lin rushed up sharply and prepared to finish off his opponent with his foot in flight. After a very powerful blow, the guy fell to the ground. He could not get to his feet. There was a broken tree next to the main character. He thought that such an attack was supposed to attract attention. His plan was at risk. Lin grabbed the unconscious guard by the hands and pulled him into the bushes. The main character went to the window in the building and tried to open it. He did not succeed in it. Lin stood near a bright window and light came out from there. He tried to open it and could not do it. The main character told himself that you can only open a window at the estate from the inside. Suddenly, a guard came out of the house to smoke. Nearby stood the main character in an invisible cloak. Lin looked at the open door and decided to run into it. He had a good opportunity. The door behind the main character closed. The guard stood near the entrance and calmly triggered. Inside the house was a luxurious atmosphere. Girls wore food on trays. The main character quickly fled inside the house in an invisible cloak. He clung to surprised maids on the move. The servants were talking among themselves. One of them said that the master never comes out at night. Lin himself thoughtfully said to himself that the Zhao Jianbai room is located in the southern wing on the second floor. The protagonist in an invisible cloak slowly climbed up in the building up the stairs. Lin stood on the second floor near the large door. He decided to go there slowly. The protagonist stood near the door and saw how light fell because of it. In the office, the owner sat with the girl. The stranger wanted to fight off the guy's harassment. Lin looked inside the room. He thought displeasedly that both brothers Zhanya died, but he himself was having fun. The girl asked the owner with excitement, "Is it true that the younger third gentleman died?" The owner viciously answered the girlfriend that even his second brother had an accident. His house was completely burned. The girlfriend asked the guy, why was he so delighted with the death of the brothers? The owner explained to his partner that he now did not need to share the inheritance with anyone. The main character stood on the side and listened carefully. He viciously thought to himself that the Zhao family was very rotten. The main character very sharply opened the door and ran inside the room. Lin ran forward and shouted that Jiao would die now. The owner stood in an embrace with a girl near the table. The protagonist swung his hand to finish off Jiao with one blow. The owner heard that someone was behind him and turned around. Jiao was very displeased. He abruptly threw the girl aside. The owner discarded the girl in the direction of the running protagonist to stop him. Lin slowed down at the full speed on the floor so as not to crash into a girl. The girl was very scared. She turned out to be between Jiao and the main character. Lin picked up a stranger in his arms. He shouted Jiao that he was a loser if he uses other people as a shield. The owner abruptly ran forward and put his hand in front of him to hit his opponent. The protagonist, very on time, and quickly dodged to the side to protect himself from the blow of Jiao. Jiao, after an unsuccessful blow, was attributed to the side. The protagonist swung his hand behind him. Lin, with all his strength, swung his knee and hit his opponent in the stomach. The displeased Jiao grabbed his own stomach with his own hands. He shouted to the opponent that he was a 3-level fighter. The protagonist viciously explained to the opponent that the fighter of the level with 3 would not do anything to him, since he was completely stuffed with potions and serums. The owner carefully looked at the uninvited guest. He realized that he had never seen him before. Jiao angrily asked the opponent, why did he dare to attack his family? The main character looked angrily at the opponent and shouted that he would kill him. Jiao looked at the protagonist with displeasure and thought that he was determined. Jay remembered the red button on his table. He needed to press her to kill an uninvited guest. The owner of the estate abruptly broke off and ran in the direction of the red button on the table. Jiao fled at full speed to the table. He was afraid at the protagonist. The joyful owner extended his hand to the red button and prepared to press it. Jiao held out his hand forward and prepared to hit the red button on the table. The owner unexpectedly and frightenedly noticed how blood appeared in his hand. The main character, with a very fast and well-aimed movement from his weapon, shot the opponent's hand. Jiao felt severe pain. He squeezed his hand from which blood was walking. The owner of the estate was scared. He shouted to the main character that he could give them a lot of time. Lin noticed how several cards lay in a shulyadka in the table over time. The protagonist in an evil voice told the opponent that the time cards could not pay for his sister's health. Jiao was very surprised when he heard from the guest a word about his sister. Lin angrily pointed to the owner of the estate with his hand and shouted that he had once shot down his sister by car. Jiao was scared. He began to recall the case of his car. Jiao, along with their girlfriend, raced at full speed on a red racing car. The guy at the wheel turned around and asked the girl, "Can she drive?" The girl scaredly advised the driver so that he was drowning more. He could knock someone. Jiao told a girlfriend that every day people die in crowds. There will be nothing bad if he kills a couple of people now. A girlfriend scaredly shouted to the guy that if he kills people, he would be punished. The driver angrily shouted to the passenger that no one would dare to punish him, since he is from the Jiao family. The driver looked in front of him and saw some girl on the road. The girl walked across the road. A red car raced at it at full speed. The red racing machine at full speed hit the passer-by to death. The passer-by, after a blow from the car, froze onto the road. Frightened people stood on the side. Jiao asked the protagonist, was he really a girl's brother? Lin viciously glanced at the owner and asked, did he not expect revenge to come so fast? Jiao ordered himself that he needed to hold out. Soon the guard was supposed to come to the rescue. The main character pulled his hand to the gun. He shouted to the frightened owner that there was no time to chat. Lin sharply took out his military weapons and shot straight at Jiao. The owner of the estate was scared. Bullets fell into his body and pierced him through. Jiao lay dead on the floor. The main character joyfully thought to himself that he finally took revenge. The main character went to the table and put forward the box. He decided to look at the contents. Jiao heard some kind of noise on the side. He realized that the guards came very quickly. A level of 4 named Zhao Mo entered the room. Next to him was a security guard named Cyu Min and 2 levels. Mo looked angrily and displeasedly at the protagonist and asked, who was one? The main character carefully looked at the rest of the time on his hand. He realized that he needed to leave. Lin looked at his opponent and realized that he looked very strong. It would be difficult for him to defeat him. Mo in glasses looked very viciously at the protagonist. He called him a boy. The fighter grinded his fists angry. He shouted that the main character dared to kill his brother's son. Lin was worried. He realized that Zhao Zheng had a brother at a level of 4. Mo very quickly and sharply ran forward to hit the opponent. Lin looked at the fighter in front of him and realized that he was a master. The main character suddenly turned around and ran to the side to hide from the opponent. Su rushed after the main character and shouted that he would not run away. Mo demanded from the fighter to leave the line for him. Mo raised 2 fingers up and decided to use a magical skill against his opponent. The main character scaredly saw a huge water ball in front of him in the way. Lin scaredly understood to himself that his opponent had rare abilities of water. The main character swung his hand to break through the water ball. In the apocalyptic environment, water magicians had a greater status than ordinary magicians. Lin knocked on a water barrier with a very powerful burning blow to break through it. The main character used a blow against the water that crushed the mountains. Lin, after an attack against the water, knocked out the window and jumped out into the street. The main character after the jump landed on the ground. Shards fell next to him. 2 fighters rushed forward at full speed to pursue their goal. Sumo at full speed jumped out the window. The fighters stood on a deserted street and carefully looked around. Mo turned around and said that he himself wants to cope with the main character. Tsu had to go and take care of Jiao. Mo turned and headed for the trees. Tsu went in the opposite direction. The fighter quietly walked through the forest and heard some noise. He looked frightenedly. Suddenly, someone on the side of the grand scale hit the side of the head with his hand over his face. The main character angrily shouted to the opponent that he could not allow him to save Jiao. The main character swung against his opponent and struck. Tsu waved wide his hand and attacked his opponent in response. The guard launched several blue lightning against the protagonist. Lin scaredly deviated to the side. The main character looked back and saw a whole group of fighters fled to him. Tsu angrily looked at his opponent and warned that he would die now. Lin frightenedly thought that Jiao should not survive. But his opponent, besides the ability of water, also had healing forces. The main character rushed forward at the opponent. He could not let him save Jiao. Siyu suddenly folded his hands and pressed their breasts. A bright lilac light appeared around him. The main character realized that his opponent very quickly fills the air around him with energy. Lin looked closely and saw a bright luminous amulet on the opponent's chest. The protagonist sharply jumped up and ran at full speed against the opponent. Lin rushed forward at full speed. His opponent stood and put his hands in front of him. The main character used a blow against the guard, which destroys the mountains. Lin on the grand scale hit the fighter on his hands. The opponent was taken far back. The main character, with a powerful blow with all his might, hit the guard with his hand in his stomach. The blow was so powerful that the inner bones of the Cu broke. The guard, after a powerful blow from the protagonist, flew off and hit his back against the wall. Lin held in his hands a pendant, which he removed from the guard. This stone made it possible to accelerate the transformation of air into an element of the carrier. This helped increase the power of attack. Suddenly, the main character heard screams on the side. Someone noticed him and fled to him. A whole group of fighters appeared on the side. They began to shoot at the tench from weapons. The main character saw bullets flying around him. He dodged them very quickly. The guards were surprised to notice that all their shells passed by Lin. The boss shouted to his subordinate so that he would no longer talk, but killed the protagonist. The fighters began to fade from all the trunks for their own purpose. The protagonist very quickly evaded to the sides. Lin decided not to fight against the guards anymore. He needed to return to the second floor and check whether Jiao died. Behind the protagonist, Mo pounced on top of the top to hit his fist with all his might. The main character bounced to the side. Mo missed and hit the ground with all his strength. Lin quickly bounced back. He realized that his opponent uses the level of level C and improved gloves. Lin thought scared to himself that if he were at least a little slower, then he would have died. His opponent was wounded and would not have lived for a long time. The main character stood and looked at his opponent. He thought that if he had removed this Jiao, then he could plunder the whole family. He would have increased strength and level of abilities. Mo extended his hand forward and very quickly rushed to attack the protagonist. Lin very quickly dodged the opponent's attack and bounced back from him. A huge burning ball appeared in the guard's hands. He prepared to attack further. Mo decided to use an improved technique against the protagonist. It was a blow to the tiger's mouth. Above him, the outline of the demonic tiger appeared in the air. The main character took out the blade. He could only attack the demonic burning tiger. Lin crushed his opponent with a blow that destroyed the mountains. There was a strong explosion and dust clubs scattered around. Mo, after a very powerful blow from the protagonist, flew off and hit the tree. After the flight and blow, the guard sat unconscious on earth. He did not move. The fighters stood and looked scared at the beaten guard. They could not say anything. Frightened guards noticed how the outlines of a person appeared in front of them among the dust clubs. The main character stood and held the blade in his hands. In front of him were bright blue lightning. The guards looked at their opponent and could not understand what technique he used. Someone said that Lin may be at the level of... The main character looked at bright lightning near his body. A thunderbat around him was formed by an explosion. Lin felt that he was full of force. The main character realized that he could no longer use this skill so as not to attract more noise. Lin turned to the side and noticed how Mo fled at him at full speed to attack. The main character looked angrily at the opponent and shouted that he would die now. Lin was very powerful and quickly attacked his opponent using a series of blows. The guard put up the block and defended himself. The soldiers on the street were surprised to look for a fight in the middle of the road. For them, it was all incredible. The main character realized that his opponent was very strong. Without a thunderbait, he would not have lasted 10 blows. Lin swung his hand to attack. He told himself that he could not waste time now. The main character put his hand forward and attacked his opponent. There was a bright blue explosion. A bright blue flash was heard between the main character and his opponent. Lin activated silent shoes on his feet. He decided that he needed to leave. The guards began to shoot a guy from all the trunks. Someone shouted that you can't let the Linia run away. The protagonist ran away with very fast and dexterous movements and evaded flying bullets. Mo, at full speed, rushed behind the main character and shouted to stop. The main character lookedly looked back and realized that his opponent was very strong, but inferior to him in speed. One of the fighters ran behind Mo, and in a frightened voice said that the master had turned into a temporary zombie. They could not stop him. Mo was very angry. A frightened guard stopped next to him. Mo looked in displeasure after the protagonist and shouted that he would find out who he was. The main character sat on a tree and heard some suspicious noise around him. Lin saw a tree from a tree. A guard of Mo at full speed ran to the building. Jiao inside the building turned into a dangerous zombie. He shouted very viciously and loudly. The protagonist on the tree extended his hand forward and said that he had revenge on his sister. Lin carefully examined the buildings in the evening city. He decided to hide. The main character jumped off the tree and ran with all his strength to the side. Lin slowly walked along the evening street. It was deserted around him. At night, there were a lot of people inside the headquarters of Knights. In the great sports hall, athletes arranged training. They fought among themselves. Inside the main office of the headquarters, in a large office, a boss sat in an armchair. The leader was sitting in a chair in an armchair. On the wall in front of him was the head of a lion. A frightened man stood near the boss table. He was very excited. The commander-in-chief of the Knights named Wu Chisan sat in an armchair and carefully studied the documents. Suddenly, the boss turned sharply and threw the documents from him aside. The papers flew off and hit in the flight of a frightened man on the head. The 16th guest grabbed his head with his hands and angrily asked the man how dared to bring such news. The man viciously explained to boss that he put a lot of effort into this plan. The guest scaredly told uncle that this was all an accident. He did not want to break the plan. Wu strictly explained to his partner that if this time something would go wrong, then the two of them will not be able to avoid punishment. The man viciously asked the boss, what could the opponent do to them? The man joyfully spread his hands to the side and shouted to the old man that very soon the whole city would belong to him. Wu demanded that the guest be in no hurry. Economic ties were still not established. The man with excitement told the old man that there is already enough temporary zones outside to break the gate. Wu explained to his partner that the head of the city has knights, wanderers, and defenders. Therefore, looters will be useless. Wu dragged on a cigar. He heard someone tap the door and shouted so that the guest would come in. Suddenly, the doors opened widely into the room. A fighter tie in uniform ran there. He called the commander-in-chief. Wu commanded the fighter to mobilize everyone before dawn. It was necessary to catch the protagonist and get the original files. The man shouted in an evil voice that Lin was just a small child, and the Knights Marineers would definitely be able to catch him before dawn. Wu showed his hand to the man and demanded that the soldiers locked him on the castle. The man was scared. A warrior came up to him to grab him. The soldier grabbed the man behind his hands. The guest displeasedly asked his uncle, "Why is he doing this with him?" The old man very viciously told the man that his life would be a bait. The guest very scaredly asked his uncle, "What does all this mean?" The boss angrily told the man that the Jiao family created all these things. But his family of Wu knew nothing about this. The man headed for the exit with the soldier. He viciously asked his uncle, did he really want to use him as a scapegoat? Wu, sitting in a chair, sternly told the man that they needed success. Failure for them is unacceptable. The commander stood and carefully looked at the group of warriors next to him. The commander showed subordinates a photograph of the protagonist for the search. The fighter informed his subordinates that the remuneration for capture Lin is 10,000 days and raising to the commander. The fighters were very happy when they heard about the award. Someone said that Lin is an ordinary fighter at the level of D9. The fighter strictly ordered his subordinates to move forward. A group of soldiers stood and looked with interest at their commander. The soldiers jumped up to their transport and at full speed rushed on the street. The main character slowly walked along the street. At this time, the soldiers on motorcycles rode behind him. Lin heard a suspicious noise behind and turned around. He saw two fighters on a motorcycle. The main character was surprised. He did not understand why the looters traveled around the city. The fighters stopped on a motorcycle and reasoned among themselves about the protagonist. One of the soldiers exhaled cigarette smoke and told his colleagues that tomorrow he was leaving the city for resources. You have to save energy. Lin looked around the corner. He thought that the looters are controlled by the WU family. To survive, he needed to hold out until dawn. The protagonist looked in front of him, in front of him, in front of him. He was in the lane. Lin heard some noise on the side and turned carefully. Someone approached him. Mo sharply ran to the guy and with all his might hit his hand on a grand scale. Lin put up a block in front of him. After a very powerful blow, the main character flew off and hit the wall. Mo slowly went to the guy near the wall and joyfully shouted that he had finally found him. The main character was very unhappy when he saw a guard in front of him. Lin thought very displeasure to himself that this place was very close to shelter. He could not fight. The main character turned sharply and ran aside at all speed. Mo turned his head after him. The guard opened his glasses and looked angrily after the runaway chief hero. Mo ran and caught up with the guy. He tried to swing his hand to hit him. The guard angrily looked at the protagonist. Lin realized that he now needed to come up with a plan as soon as possible. The protagonist activated a military skill called a lightning rod. Bright lightning appeared around him. Lin abruptly broke forward and rushed forward on the attack on the guard. The protagonist in flight sharply knocked the guard with his hand and blocked the blow. Lin spread sharply and hit Mo's foot on the head with all his might. Very bright lightning sparkled on the street, and there were loud explosions everywhere. The guard angrily thought that the protagonist had a very strong force. Mo put his hand forward to block the strike of the protagonist. He shouted that Lin had killed a lot of people and would not live on. The main character held his hand in front of him and blocked from the opponent. Lin, after defending from the attack of the guard, thought that he could not defeat his opponent with ordinary blows. The main character continued to block the blows from the opponent. He could no longer spend a lot of effort. Mo swung from above to hit the protagonist with his foot. Lin thought that he was haunted by several influential families and the whole city. He could not allow the world to learn that physical strength could exist in the same body with the power of the element. Mo wanted to hit the guy with his foot on the head. The protagonist defended himself with his hands. He decided to use his lightning against the opponent. The protagonist was protected by his hands from blows. He decided that he had to take his sister from the city. Lin put his hand and leg forward to fight off the guard in the flight. Mo, with all his strength, swung his fist. He shouted to the guy that he would die now. There was a very bright flash. The main character beat off the guard's hand with his hand. After an unsuccessful attack on the opponent, Mo bounced far back and began to move away. Lin bounced back the tench. He landed and touched his hands to the ground. The protagonist in his own voice said that the opponent forced him to use special skills. Lin began to wave his hands in all directions. Near his body there was a loud noise. Mo looked at him in dismay. The guard looked at the guy in surprise. He did not understand what he was going to do. The main character held his hands in front of him. He heard some ringing on the side. Mo shouted to the guy that he found a girl and his sister. Lin demanded from the guard to let both girls let go. The main character realized that his sister hostage. The guard angrily shouted to the main character that he was strong, but he now had hostages. Lin viciously asked the fighter what did he want from him now. Mo shouted to the main character and demanded that he give him files. The main character answered the partner that he did not carry a flash drive with him. Mo handed the guy a phone. He said that he gives him 10 seconds to think. Otherwise, he will kill hostages. The main character looked angrily at the guard and realized that he should now save his sister. The guard looked angrily at the protagonist and told him that his sister was not very expensive for him. Someone called the guard and strictly asked if he caught that guy. Mo told boss that he caught a guy, but he refused to hand over his files. The boss on the phone viciously demanded from the guard so that he would not kill the guy until he received files. He wanted the line to lead to him. The guard viciously told the chief hero that he was lucky this time. Lin realized that the sisters were abducted, were afraid that she published files. Lin viciously looked at the guard and realized that it would be possible to agree only with the help of a flash drive. The dissatisfied main character rode silently in the car. Near him in the seat was a Moscow region. Lin, accompanied by his companion, drove up by car to the core, where the Knights of the Marauders were located. The main character was surprised to consider the building. He was amazed that this was the headquarters of the Marauders. Mo explained to the chief hero that the headquarters of the Knights of the Looters is the safest place in the city. If an accident occurs, then this place can be immediately turned into a shelter. The main character went inside the building with the guard. There were a lot of armed people. The main character carefully looked at the fighters indoors. There were many warriors of level C. Lin looked around and realized that he himself would not survive in this place. The protagonist in fright remembered to himself that he had hidden files. Lin remembered how he put in a box with a flash drive under a tree to hide. The main character looked at the warriors next to him. They were at least 4 levels. The guy noticed the old man next to him. He turned around and looked at him carefully. The main character looked at the old man near the wall. He decided that it was Tishan, the head of the Knights of the Looters. Lin looked at the master. He thought to himself that the old man reached the level of 9. Wu turned to the side and looked at the protagonist. Lin scaredly thought that the old man was at the upper level with 9. The main character with excitement felt that from one glance of the old man his body froze. Wu dragged on a cigar and asked the protagonist with his name. The guy angry and displeasedly confirmed to the master that his name was Lin Qi. The old man glanced angrily at the protagonist and said that he would not talk to him like that. Lin waved his hand in front of him and asked the master with displeasure, "Where is his sister?" Wu waved his hand to the side. He gave a sign to his subordinates. One of the fighters went to the door to open it. Behind her were 2 girls. A girlfriend of the protagonist came out of the door. Next to her in a wheelchair was his sister. The girl was very scared. She excitedly called the protagonist by name. Lin asked her girlfriend, "Is she all right?" The girl answered the guy that everything was fine with them. The protagonist thought about himself displeasedly that the abductors decided to seem noble. The old man told the main character that he did not give the girls offense. He promised the guy that he could use the best doctors and modern equipment to cure his sister. Wu looked at the guy and explained that he could do all this for him in exchange for files. The protagonist realized that if he returned the files to the kidnappers, he would die with the girls. Lin decided that he needed to hold out until dawn. The old man shouted very displeasedly to the guy so that he did not pull time. The protagonist thought with excitement that the old man in front of him is not at all good. Lin told the old man that Jianbai knocked down his sister by car. Therefore, he killed this guy. He also killed the other 2 brothers, Jiao. The main character did not believe that his grandfather would let him go now. Su looked strictly at the guy and promised him that he was giving him his word. The protagonist thought displeasedly that he would never believe the old man. The door to the room opened and the man ran up. He shouted loudly that all this is impossible. The guest pointed his finger at the protagonist and shouted that he could not let this guy go. An angry man reminded the old man that they could not let go of the protagonist. Qianbai and the rest were dead. The man joyfully shouted to the old man that the main character under torture would definitely tell them where his files are. Wu dragged on a cigar and looked silently at his partner. He did not tell him anything. Grandfather, with all his might, hit the man on his face and shouted that he could not prevent all this. The man was very angry. He did not understand why the old man hit his hand. Wu said in a strict voice to the angry man that if he violates his plan, he will not live. The main character stood on the side and listened carefully to the conversation. He could not understand what kind of plan his grandfather was talking about. The old man looked suspiciously at the guy and asked what he was thinking about it to everyone. Wu spread his hands to the side. He told the main character that he was controlled by the best medical team. The girl should get decent care. Lin scaredly thought to himself that if he now removes the old man, then he would not see the sun tomorrow morning. A fighter ran up from the side and reported to the commander, which was already very late. The old man said thoughtfully that if it did not work out in a good way, then you need to do everything in bad. Wu threw his cigar and she fell to the floor. Grandfather told the subordinate that he leaves all this on him. The fighter turned and headed for the main character. He shouted to the captain that in 10 minutes he guarantees the task. The fighter held out his hand to the side and shouted to his subordinates to take the girls. The girl frightenedly extended her hand to the main character and asked him for help. Lin saw how his girlfriend was taken away and his sister was taken away. He could not help them. A frightened fighter ran up from the side. He shouted to the captain that the lord of the city was here. The old man held a cigar in his hands. He turned around and was surprised to ask the fighter, "What did he say?" The old man released a cigar from his hand. He asked the subordinate how many people brought the city lord. The fighter scaredly answered his grandfather that the lord had brought one person and soon they would be here. Wu thoughtfully said that the lord had come with his assistant fighter of the level of 6. The old man stepped aside. He ordered his subordinates to spend people and would not stand here. The main character stood from behind, surrounded by 2 fighters. The door to the next room opened, and the main character went there with the girls. The guard angrily told the guy with the girls that if they resist, he would kill them in place. Lin thought and realized that the lord saw the files. He decided that the Jiao and Wu family would soon come to an end. The subordinate told the old man that the city lord used to be at the level of... Recently he was wounded, and now he is at the level of 9. They could now take the opportunity. Wu stopped. He slyly said that the old man was used to the world. Now it's very late for him to get involved in conflicts. If Laurel spent only one person with him, then they can deal with him today. The man shouted to the old man from the side that in this case they would not need to implement their plan. Residents will be calm and everyone will be happy. The protagonist carefully listened to the conversation of the knights from the side. He did not understand why they all opposed the lord. Lin looked at the fighter near the door. He decided that he had only 5 levels and can be attacking him stealthily. There could be a lot of security outside. The main character thought about the elite, who was fighting day with the remaining zombies of time. The city had 4 levels of knights. The main task of the Knights of the Looters was to hunt the zombies of the time and the collection of available supplies. Lin realized that the power of the looters is comparable to the force of the defenders who guard the city. The old man looked piercingly in front of him. He noticed how someone went into the room. The old man, accompanied by his guard, walked around the hall with a confident step. He was heading to Wu. The lord of the city of Zuanshan, slowly, was accompanied by a large guard. Old man Wu greeted the city's lord who came in front of him. The lord asked the old man in displeasure, why could he not sleep today? Wu with excitement asked the city lord, why did he always come? The guest looked angrily at the old man and asked how he himself thinks. The old man glanced angrily to the side and shouted so that the man knelt. The man on his knees apologized to the city lord. He admitted that he was wrong. The lord asked his partner displeasedly, why does he conduct experiments on people? The man scaredly explained to the old man that the experiment was almost over. If everything goes successfully, then the zombies of the time will no longer threaten their city. The man suddenly got angry and shouted to Lorad that people would again return to their position of dominant power on Earth. The Lord strictly ordered the man so that he would not experiment with the lives of innocent people. Wu carefully looked at his guest. He remembered that the old man's condition continued to deteriorate. He could not understand why the Lord looked full of life. Wu thought that if everything goes according to plan, then they will achieve the goal. If they begin to act now and something will go wrong, then all the hard work will be in vain. Wu hit the man with his hand on his back. He explained to the Lord that he himself would figure it out. The man was scared. He looked aside and decided that his uncle wanted to kill him. The subordinate became in the combat rack. He shouted to the old man that he wanted him to become a scapegoat for him. It would be impossible. The old man was very angry. He looked angry and displeasedly at the man. Wu looked to the side and noticed how he ran into a subordinate fighter very quickly to him. The fighter ran to the guard from behind, and with all his might, hit his head on the head from behind. The lord turned to the side displeasedly. He realized that his guard was neutralized. The old man viciously asked the guest, why did he become the lord of the city? The lord looked at the old man displeasedly and asked what he wanted to do. Wu demanded that the guest immediately abandon the authorities. He promised the lord that he would leave him whole. The lord asked the old man displeasedly, did he really want him to transfer power to him? Wu viciously told the guest that he was already at death, but he is still pretending to be a level B. Fighters ran from all sides in the room to attack him. The protagonist was scaredly realized that the fighters really wanted to kill the lord. For him, a good opportunity to escape. The main character turned sharply and shouted a surprised girlfriend to cling her eyes. The girl frightenedly obeyed the guy and closed her eyes so as not to see anything. The protagonist extended his hands forward and activated the military skill called the Thunderbone. Around the body of the protagonist, a bright light appeared. A fire caught fire in front of him. Lin sharply swung his hand, and with all his might, hit one of the guards in the face. The main character turned sharply and shouted to his girlfriend that she should follow him. The main character ran sharply forward. He wanted to quickly hide with his girlfriends. The lord calmly stood in the center of the room and rested on his cane. The city's lord was able to beat all the guards around. In front of him stood Wu. Wu fell to his knees. He viciously asked the guest, why is he still so strong? The old man grabbed the phone and shouted to his subordinates to start the execution of the plan. The lord looked at the old man displeasedly and asked with fear, what kind of plan is this? The old man cried out joyfully that chaos would be transferred to the city. Very little time will pass before the zombies of the time break through the gates of the city. The lord was very scared when he heard such words. He looked in front of him and did not know what to do. The main character understood displeasedly that the knights, for the sake of the place of the lord, wanted to destroy the city. The old man carefully looked at the phone. He said that the wandering zombies of time suddenly gathered, and for some reason approached the city gate. Suddenly, the lord swung and hit the old man with his foot with all his might. Wu flew to the side. Wu, after a very powerful blow from the old man, flew off and crashed into the wall. The main character rushed to the side sharply. He decided to hide with his girlfriends. The lord sharply swung his stick and wanted to hit the guard. A girlfriend rolled an unconscious girl in a stroller. She scaredly asked the protagonist, what would they do? The main character shouted to his girlfriend that I needed to move forward. He looked scared at the city buildings. The guy, along with his girlfriends, stood on the city outskirts. Explosions were visible everywhere. The girl was scared and asked what was going on here. Huge burning zombies appeared. They saw people with loud screams rushed at them. The main character opened the system window. He decided for himself to purchase additional things to protect.